It was May 3, 2018, a crisp autumn morning in New South Wales, Australia. Dylan Price, a 32-year-old lifelong surfer, arrived at the secluded Crescent Head beach before dawn. Known for its consistent waves and quiet surroundings, the beach was a haven for surfers who preferred the solitude of the early morning hours. Dylan, like many others, loved the thrill of catching the first waves of the day, a routine surfers call dawn patrol. Dylan grew up in nearby Kempsey, a small town inland from the coast. His parents often brought him to the beach when he was a child, and by the time he was 10, he was already surfing. Over the years, he developed a deep connection to the ocean, finding peace and clarity in its rhythm. Now a carpenter by trade, Dylan managed to balance his work life with his love for surfing, often waking before sunrise to spend an hour or two on the waves before heading to job sites. On this particular morning, Dylan parked his truck in the small lot near the dunes. He grabbed his board and a short wetsuit, feeling the cool breeze as he made his way toward the shoreline. The beach was nearly empty with only one other car parked nearby. In the distance, he spotted another surfer paddling out, but the figure was too far to recognize. The horizon glowed faintly, signaling the sun's slow rise. Dylan stretched for a few minutes, placed his leash around his ankle, and waded into the water. The ocean was calm, with only the sound of small waves breaking against the sand. Crescent Head is known for its marine life, from dolphins to colorful schools of fish. But this stretch of water is also part of Australia's shark coast. Great white sharks are common here, drawn by the abundance of seals and baitfish. Surfers are well aware of their presence, but attacks are rare enough that most don't give it much thought. As Dylan paddled out, the cold water jolted him awake. His arms moved in a steady rhythm, the familiar motion calming his nerves. He reached the lineup where waves form and surfers wait to catch their rides. For a few minutes he floated, scanning the horizon for the perfect wave. The first few waves came and went. Dylan caught one riding smoothly before kicking out and paddling back for another. Everything seemed perfect. A quiet beach, decent waves, and the freedom of the open water. But as Dylan turned to paddle for his next wave, something changed. The water beneath him shifted. It was subtle, but surfers learned to notice even the smallest differences. He felt the ocean grow strangely still for a moment, and then it happened. A crushing grip clamped onto his right leg, pulling him violently off his board. Dylan barely had time to process what was happening before the pain hit him. It was sharp and overwhelming, radiating from his thigh to his entire body. He kicked instinctively, trying to free himself, but the predator's jaws were locked tight. It was a great white shark, likely over 12 feet long. These apex predators are known for their raw power, capable of dragging seals, and sometimes humans, underwater with ease. The shark's bite was bone-crushing, its serrated teeth tearing through flesh and muscle. Dylan's survival instincts kicked in. Despite the pain, he reached down and punched the shark near its gills, one of the few vulnerable spots on its body. The shark shook its head, thrashing Dylan from side to side. His surfboard floated nearby, and in a desperate move, Dylan grabbed his leash and used it to wrap around the shark's snout. He pulled with all his strength, trying to loosen its grip. Miraculously, the shark released him. Blood clouded the water as Dylan floated, gasping for air. The shark circled once more, its black eyes fixed on him. But it didn't strike again. Instead, it swam away, disappearing into the deep. Dylan, his leg torn and bleeding heavily, clung to his surfboard, trying to stay conscious. The pain was unbearable, and Dylan's strength was fading fast. He began paddling toward shore, but his movements were slow and weak. Each stroke sent fresh waves of pain through his leg, but he knew he had to keep going. Then, in the distance, he saw the other surfer. It was a middle-aged man on a longboard who had noticed the commotion and paddled toward him. The man reached Dylan and immediately realized the severity of the situation. Without hesitation, he helped Dylan onto his longboard, carefully balancing him to avoid further injury. Together they paddled toward shore, but the tension wasn't over. The shark's dorsal fin reappeared, trailing them ominously. The predator wasn't done. Its instincts were triggered by the blood in the water. The surfers paddled harder, their eyes fixed on the shoreline, which still seemed agonizingly far away. The shark followed for what felt like an eternity. It swam close enough that they could see its shadow beneath the surface, but it didn't attack again. Dylan clung to the board, his breaths shallow and rapid. He focused on staying awake, knowing that losing consciousness could mean drowning. Finally, they reached the shallows. The other surfer jumped off his board and dragged Dylan onto the sand. By now, a small group of early risers had gathered, alerted by the commotion. Someone called emergency services, while others used towels and wetsuits to try to stop Dylan's bleeding. His leg was a mess, deep gashes exposed muscle and bone, and the blood loss was severe. An ambulance arrived within minutes. Paramedics stabilized Dylan and rushed him to the nearest hospital. He survived the attack, but his leg was severely damaged, requiring multiple surgeries and months of rehabilitation. The incident sent shockwaves through the Crescent Head community. Dylan's story became a hot topic, sparking debates about shark management and the risks surfers face. While some called for increased shark culling, others argued for greater respect for the ocean's natural inhabitants. For Dylan, the attack was life-changing. His love for surfing remained, but his relationship with the sea was forever altered. The memory of the shark's bite and the struggle to survive would stay with him. A stark reminder of the ocean's power and unpredictability started like any other morning on the water. Claire Thompson, a 29-year-old marine biologist, steadied her kayak just off the coast of Kaikoura, New Zealand. She wasn't just there for fun. This was her fieldwork. Kaikoura is one of the best places in the world to study marine life. Its waters are packed with whales, seals, and dolphins, thanks to a deep underwater canyon that brings nutrients to the surface. Claire had spent months observing the dusky dolphins that played and hunted in the area, but February 18, 2013, was the day her quiet routine took a terrifying turn. Claire had woken early that morning, packed her gear, and headed to the shoreline before sunrise. The air was crisp and the water looked calm. She wore a wetsuit and packed a dry bag with a waterproof notebook, a small camera, and a handheld radio. Her kayak was fitted with an emergency buoy, a precaution she'd never had to use. She paddled out as the first light hit the horizon, aiming for a spot about a mile offshore where she had often seen dolphins. For the first hour, everything was peaceful. Claire spotted a pod of dusky dolphins not far from her kayak and began documenting their behavior. They darted and leaped through the water, seemingly unbothered by her presence. Claire took a few photos, her paddle resting across her lap. She loved this kind of work. The stillness, the focus, and the feeling of being part of the ocean's rhythm. But as she drifted, she noticed a change in the water around her. The dolphins she had been watching suddenly scattered, their sleek bodies vanishing into the depths. Claire frowned, her eyes scanning the surface. The calm was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. The attack came without warning. A massive force struck from below, sending the kayak flying. Claire barely had time to react before she was thrown into the water. The impact left her disoriented, the world around her spinning as she fought to resurface. When she broke through, gasping for air, she realized her kayak was upside down a few meters away. Then she felt it, a rough, sandpaper-like scrape against her leg. It was a great white shark, easily over 15 feet long. These apex predators are known to patrol Kaikoura's waters, drawn by the seals and other prey that thrive there. Claire had read about encounters like this, but never imagined being in one herself. She froze, her mind racing as she tried to remember every safety protocol she had ever learned. The shark circled her, its massive body moving with unsettling grace. Claire knew not to thrash or panic, but it was nearly impossible to stay calm. She reached for the emergency buoy attached to her kayak, managing to inflate it with trembling hands. The bright orange device bobbed to the surface, designed to act as a deterrent or marker in case of trouble. The shark turned its attention to the buoy for a moment, nudging it with its snout. Claire took the opportunity to grab her radio from the dry bag, which was still strapped to the kayak. Her voice shook as she called for help, giving her coordinates and describing the situation. While she waited for a response, the shark's behavior changed. It moved toward the kayak, biting into the hull with terrifying force. The sound of crunching plastic echoed in Claire's ears as the shark dragged the kayak underwater. Her only lifeline was disappearing before her eyes. Claire tried to remain as still as possible, floating near the buoy. The shark resurfaced, its dark eyes locking onto her. She held her breath, her mind screaming for a way out. Minutes felt like hours. Claire could hear the distant hum of an engine, A rescue boat was on its way. But the shark didn't leave. It continued to circle, occasionally bumping the buoy or diving beneath her. Claire clung to the buoy, trying to make herself as small and uninteresting as possible. When the rescue boat finally arrived, Claire's relief was overwhelming. The crew threw her a line, urging her to stay calm as they approached. The shark, perhaps startled by the boat's engine, moved away but didn't fully retreat. Claire grabbed the line, her arms shaking as the crew pulled her aboard. She collapsed onto the deck, her body trembling from the cold and adrenaline. The shark lingered near the surface for a few moments before disappearing into the depths. The ordeal lasted just over 30 minutes, but for Claire it felt like a lifetime. Her leg had a deep scrape from the shark's rough skin and her kayak was destroyed. Despite her injuries and the terror she felt, Claire's work with marine life didn't stop. If anything, the experience deepened her fascination with the ocean and its predators, leading her to focus on the role fear plays in how humans perceive sharks. That morning in Kaikoura changed Claire's life. The ocean, with all its beauty and danger, reminded her of its raw power in the most unforgettable way. Clearwater Beach, Florida, was alive with activity on August 12, 2008. The sound of laughter mixed with the crash of waves as families built sandcastles. Kids played in the shallows, and tourists lounged under colorful umbrellas. Clearwater isn't just a beach, it's a destination that feels like a slice of paradise. Known for its soft white sand and calm Gulf waters, it's one of the most popular spots for locals and visitors alike. Ethan Jacobs, a 26-year-old lifeguard, was on duty that day. He stood in the main lifeguard tower, scanning the shoreline with a steady gaze. Ethan wasn't just a lifeguard, he was someone who truly loved the ocean. Growing up in Tampa, just an hour away, he spent most of his childhood in the water, surfing, swimming, and fishing with his dad. His parents ran a small seafood restaurant, and while he helped out there as a teenager, he always knew his real passion was at the beach. Ethan had been a lifeguard for 3 years. At 6'2" and lean, he was built for the job. But it wasn't just his physique that made him good at it. Ethan had a calm, confident way of handling emergencies. Whether it was a child who got separated from their parents or a swimmer who underestimated the Gulf's currents, Ethan was always ready to help. The day started like any other. Ethan arrived early, meeting up with his fellow lifeguards to check the equipment and go over safety protocols. It was a warm, sunny day and the Gulf waters were inviting. By mid-morning, the beach was packed. Ethan worked with his team to keep swimmers inside the designated safe zones, marked by bright red flags. Florida's waters are home to a variety of marine life. You'll often see dolphins, stingrays, and schools of fish close to shore. Sharks, of course, are a natural part of this ecosystem. Bull sharks and blacktips are the most common species in the area. But great white sharks, though rare, sometimes pass through during their long migrations. These apex predators are powerful, reaching lengths of over 15 feet and weighing more than 2,000 pounds. Ethan knew the risks that came with the job. Every lifeguard did. But you wouldn't think about it too much when you're scanning a sea of people splashing around and having fun. By early afternoon, Ethan was in the lifeguard tower watching the water through his binoculars. Around 2:30 p.m., something caught his eye. Far beyond the safe zone, a lone swimmer was struggling. The man's arms flailed and his head bobbed in and out of the water. It was clear he wasn't just playing around. He was in serious trouble. Without hesitation, Ethan grabbed his rescue buoy and sprinted toward the water. As he ran, he radioed his team to alert them. The other lifeguards cleared the area, blowing their whistles to get swimmers out of the water. Ethan dove into the Gulf, his strong strokes carrying him quickly toward the distressed swimmer. As Ethan got closer, he noticed something terrifying. A large dorsal fin sliced through the water near the man. It was unmistakable. A great white shark. The shark struck before Ethan could reach the swimmer. It lunged, grabbing the man's leg and pulling him under. Blood spread in the water and Ethan's heart raced. He swam harder, his focus locked on saving the man. When Ethan reached him, the man was in shock, his leg bleeding heavily. Ethan wrapped the buoy's strap around the man and began towing him toward shore. But the shark wasn't done. It circled them slowly, its movements calculated and deliberate. Then, without warning, the shark attacked again. The predator lunged at Ethan, clamping its powerful jaws around his left arm. The force was overwhelming, and the pain was instant and excruciating. Ethan screamed but didn't let go of the swimmer. Using his free hand, he grabbed the buoy and struck the shark's head, aiming for its sensitive snout. The shark thrashed, pulling Ethan and the swimmer underwater. Ethan fought with everything he had. He hit the shark again and again, refusing to give up. Finally, the shark released its grip, but Ethan's arm was mangled, bleeding heavily. He surfaced, gasping for air, and continued to drag the swimmer toward shore. By now, another lifeguard, Amanda Reese, had reached them on a paddleboard. Amanda, a 22-year-old with a fearless attitude, immediately assessed the situation. She helped lift the swimmer onto the board and signaled for Ethan to hold on. Too weak to climb aboard, Ethan clung to the side as Amanda paddled toward shore. The shark followed closely, its dorsal fin cutting through the water just behind them. At one point, it bumped the paddleboard, testing its strength. Amanda paddled harder, her focus entirely on getting everyone to safety. The shore felt impossibly far away. Ethan could see the crowd gathered at the water's edge, the other lifeguards waving for everyone to stay clear. His vision blurred as blood loss and exhaustion took their toll. When they finally reached the shallows, several beachgoers rushed in to help. They pulled Ethan and the swimmer onto the sand, where paramedics were already waiting. The swimmer, a tourist visiting from out of town, was taken to the hospital with severe but survivable injuries to his leg. Ethan, however, was in critical condition. The shark had crushed the bones in his arm, shredding muscle and tissue. Doctors worked tirelessly to save Ethan's arm, but the damage was too severe. They had no choice but to amputate just below the shoulder. The incident made headlines across the country. Ethan was hailed as a hero and praised for his bravery and selflessness. Despite the loss of his arm, he inspired a renewed focus on beach safety and shark education. The tourist, whose name was never publicly released, left town shortly after recovering. Ethan, meanwhile, faced months of rehabilitation and media attention. While the experience changed his life forever, his love for the ocean remained unshaken, a reminder of both its beauty and its unpredictability. In September 2024, a rescue crew embarked on a mission that would soon turn into a nightmare. Off the coast of Cape Cod, the team prepared to retrieve a stranded sailboat reported to be in distress. The crew, consisting of 4 experienced members, had worked together for years. Among them was Captain Mark Lawson, a seasoned sailor known for his calm demeanor during emergencies. Beside him was Sarah Jenkins, a skilled navigator who had grown up near the sea. The team also included diver Elizabeth Moore, admired for her courage and expertise underwater, and technician Peter Alvarez, responsible for maintaining the boat and its equipment. The morning began with a dense fog settling over the coastline, creating an eerie stillness in the air. The team set off from Chatham Harbor aboard their rescue boat, a sturdy vessel designed to withstand rough waters. As they navigated the waves, the stranded sailboat's location came into view. It appeared tilted, its mast swaying unsteadily in the gentle current. The crew sprang into action, preparing ropes and equipment for the operation ahead. The waters surrounding Cape Cod had long been known for their beauty and abundance of marine life, but they were also home to one of nature's most formidable predators, the great white shark. In recent years, sightings have increased, drawing concern among local fishermen and marine biologists. Yet, attacks on rescue vessels were almost unheard of, making what was about to unfold all the more shocking. The crew maneuvered their boat carefully toward the stranded vessel, maintaining steady communication with one another. Elizabeth, equipped with her diving gear, prepared to enter the water to assess the sailboat's stability. Just as she was about to dive, the unexpected happened. From beneath the surface, a massive great white shark rammed the boat with immense force. The impact jolted the crew, sending them stumbling as the boat tilted violently to one side. The shark struck again, this time with even greater force, its powerful body causing the vessel to capsize. The crew was thrown into the cold Atlantic waters, their survival instincts kicking in as they fought to stay afloat. The once calm sea turned chaotic, with debris from the overturned boat swirling around them. The team struggled to swim toward nearby support boats, but the shark's presence filled the water with a palpable sense of fear. Amid the confusion, Elizabeth found herself separated from the others. Her diving gear, now a hindrance, slowed her movements as she tried to reach safety. The shark, drawn by the splashing and movement, turned its focus on her. With a sudden burst of speed, it lunged toward Elizabeth. biting her leg as she struggled to escape. The other crew members, witnessing the attack, shouted and waved to the support boats for help, their voices drowned out by the crashing waves. As Elizabeth fought against the pain and shock, the support boats finally arrived. Crew members reached out to pull her aboard, but the extent of her injuries became immediately apparent. The battle for survival had only just begun. The support boat sped toward the shore as Elizabeth lay on the deck, her injuries severe. The shark's bite had torn through the muscle in her leg, leaving deep wounds that bled heavily. Despite the crew's frantic efforts to slow the bleeding, her condition worsened. The other members of the rescue team, drenched and shaken, huddled nearby, their faces pale with fear and exhaustion. Captain Mark attempted to steer the smaller vessel while Peter and Sarah focused on helping Elizabeth. As they neared the harbor, emergency responders waited on shore, alerted to the unfolding tragedy. Paramedics rushed to carry Elizabeth onto a stretcher. However, despite their efforts to stabilize her, she succumbed to her injuries shortly after arriving at the hospital. News of her passing spread quickly, leaving her teammates and the community in shock. Elizabeth had been known for her bravery and dedication, making the loss even more heartbreaking. The aftermath of the attack rippled across Cape Cod and beyond. Media outlets reported on the rare and tragic event, sparking widespread concern. Experts debated the reasons behind the shark's aggression. Marine biologists suggested that the shark may have mistaken the boat's movement for a large prey animal or been agitated by human activity in the area. The incident reignited long-standing fears about the risks posed by great white sharks in waters frequented by people. Authorities launched an investigation to understand what had gone wrong. The rescue boat's design and safety protocols were scrutinized, as were the crew's actions during the mission. Although the team had followed standard procedures, questions arose about whether additional precautions could have prevented the tragedy. Public pressure led to changes in how rescue operations were conducted in shark-prone regions. New policies included mandatory shark deterrent devices on all vessels and enhanced training for crews working in areas with known shark activity. Elizabeth's family and colleagues mourned her deeply. Her life was celebrated at a memorial service attended by friends, co-workers, and members of the local community. Stories of her courage and dedication were shared, highlighting her role in saving countless lives during her career. A scholarship fund was established in her name to support aspiring marine rescuers, ensuring her legacy would continue to inspire others. For the surviving crew members, the experience left lasting scars. Mark, Peter, and Sarah struggled to come to terms with the events of that day. They attended counseling sessions together, finding some solace in their shared grief. Despite their efforts to move forward, the memory of the attack lingered, reshaping their view of the sea they had once loved. The incident also sparked broader discussions about the relationship between humans and marine predators. Some argued for stricter protections for sharks, emphasizing their importance to the ecosystem. Others pushed for measures to reduce interactions between sharks and people, aiming to prevent similar tragedies in the future. The waters off Cape Cod returned to their usual rhythm, but for those who knew Elizabeth, they carried a somber reminder of the delicate balance between humans and nature. In March 2024, a group of backpackers embarked on an adventurous trip to Western Australia, eager to explore its untouched coastline. Among them was Adam, a young traveler from the United States, visiting the country for the first time. He had always dreamed of experiencing the natural beauty of Australia, with its vast beaches and crystal-clear waters. Joining him were Sarah and Mark, seasoned travelers from Canada, and Priya, an environmental science student from India. The group bonded over their shared love for nature and their excitement about discovering remote and pristine locations. The backpackers decided to explore a secluded stretch of beach near the Cape Range National Park. The area was famous for its breathtaking views and turquoise waters. While the beach was remote and unpatrolled, its beauty tempted them to venture further. On that warm afternoon, they reached the sandy shore, marveling at the calm waves and the endless horizon. Without hesitation, they dropped their backpacks and ran toward the inviting water. Adam, enthusiastic and adventurous, led the way into the sea. He had been captivated by the idea of swimming in such a picturesque spot. His friends followed, laughing and enjoying the cool water as it shimmered under the bright sun. The group swam further from the shore, feeling confident and unaware of the hidden dangers lurking beneath the surface. As they floated and played, a sudden splash behind them went unnoticed. A bull shark had entered the area, drawn by the movement in the water. Sharks were rarely seen near this beach, but the absence of human activity had created a haven for marine life. The group remained blissfully unaware until the shark made its first move. The peaceful atmosphere shattered as Adam suddenly felt a sharp pull on his arm. The water around him rippled with movement, and before he could react, the shark lunged with terrifying speed. Its teeth sank deep into his arm, causing an explosion of pain that took his breath away. Adam screamed, his cry piercing the calm air. His friends whipped around, eyes wide with horror as they saw the blood quickly spreading through the water. Panic surged as they swam toward him, desperately trying to reach him before the shark made another move. Sarah and Mark reached Adam first, grabbing him and trying to pull him back to shore. The shark circled them, its presence adding to their fear. Priya, still in the water, shouted for help, but there was no one else around. The group struggled to move quickly, the weight of Adam and the strong currents slowing them down. As they neared the beach, the shark struck again, this time with even greater force. It lunged at Adam, dragging him under the water. His friends fought against the powerful pull, desperately trying to hold on. Sarah and Mark pulled with all their strength, finally managing to free him from the shark's grip. Blood trailed behind them as they reached the shallows. They carried Adam to the sand, his arm severely injured and his body limp from the attack. His skin was pale from shock and he bled heavily, leaving a trail of crimson in the sand. Despite their best efforts to stop the bleeding, the severity of his wounds left them fearing the worst. Adam lay on the sand, gasping for breath, his body trembling from the pain. The gashes on his arm and side bled profusely, soaking the sand beneath him. His friends worked frantically, using their clothes to try and staunch the bleeding. The air was thick with tension, and the sound of crashing waves felt distant as if the world around them had fallen silent. Mark checked the surroundings, hoping for any sign of help. The remote location, which had seemed so beautiful earlier, now felt isolating and dangerous. The nearest road was several kilometers away, and the group had no way to call for assistance. Priya remembered her basic first aid training and attempted to keep Adam conscious, but his condition was worsening quickly. The group's efforts to save Adam were frantic, but his injuries were too severe. Blood loss became critical, draining the life from him. His face turned pale and his body grew cold. With each passing minute, his strength faded, and soon he stopped responding. Sarah, Mark, and Priya were powerless, helplessly watching as their friend's life slipped away. The crushing realization of his passing hit them with overwhelming force, leaving them paralyzed by grief and shock. The group sat in stunned silence on the beach, their eyes fixed on the water that had once beckoned them. Adam's death felt surreal, and the horrifying reality of what had unfolded began to sink in. His lifeless body lay on the sand, a stark reminder of the tragic turn their day had taken. What had once been a peaceful shoreline now felt heavy with sorrow, and the friends were consumed by an overwhelming sense of guilt and helplessness. As the day faded into the evening, they made the painful decision to leave the beach and seek help. Carrying their backpacks and Adam's belongings, they walked along the shoreline, leaning on each other for support. The journey back to civilization was slow and draining, both physically and emotionally. Each step was a harsh reminder of the loss they had just endured. When they finally reached a ranger station hours later, they reported the incident. Authorities were quick to respond, retrieving Adam's body and launching an investigation into the attack. News of the tragedy spread quickly, sparking a debate about safety in remote areas and the risks of swimming in unpatrolled waters. Experts confirmed that a bull shark had likely been responsible, and they emphasized the importance of educating tourists about shark activity in the region. Signs were soon placed along the beaches, warning visitors to stay in shallower areas and avoid swimming alone. For Sarah, Mark, and Priya, the experience left a lasting mark. They struggled to come to terms with the loss of their friend and the trauma of witnessing the attack. The once carefree group found themselves questioning the choices they had made that day. The tragedy also led to calls for increased awareness campaigns, urging travelers to research local wildlife and understand potential dangers before exploring new places. Adam's story became a sobering reminder of the risks that come with adventure and the importance of caution in nature. June 2023, marine biologist Emily and her team of dedicated volunteers were working in the warm waters off the coast of Florida. Their mission was to restore the coral reefs that had been damaged by various environmental factors. This project was especially important to Emily, who had spent years studying marine life and the delicate balance of ocean ecosystems. The volunteers, a mix of experienced divers and newcomers eager to help, were all committed to the cause of preserving the underwater world. The team spent their days planting new coral and monitoring the health of existing reefs. They worked in the shallow waters where the sun could still penetrate the ocean and provide life to the corals. The shallow areas were generally safe, but Emily and the team knew that, like any area in the ocean, they were not completely free from dangers. They always kept an eye on the water and were trained to handle any unexpected situations. Still, nothing could have prepared them for what was about to happen. One afternoon, as the group worked on a section of the reef, one of the volunteers, Peter, suddenly found himself in danger. He was focused on planting a new coral when, without warning, a large bull shark appeared. The shark, perhaps startled or simply curious, lunged at Peter, sinking its sharp teeth into his arm. Peter, caught off guard, screamed in pain and struggled to get free. His sudden movement caused more panic and the shark became more aggressive. Peter tried to defend himself, using his hands and equipment to push the shark away, but the powerful creature was too strong. Emily and another volunteer, Mark, noticed Peter's distress and immediately swam toward him. They had seen sharks before in the area, but this attack was something none of them could have expected. Emily reached Peter as quickly as she could, grabbing for him and trying to pull him away from the shark's grip. Mark was close behind, attempting to ward off the shark. Despite their best efforts, the shark was relentless. It turned back toward Peter, biting deeper into his body, pulling him away from Emily and Mark. In that terrifying moment, time seemed to stand still. The team was trained to respond to emergencies, but there was little they could do to help Peter in time. The shark was simply too fast and too powerful. After several seconds that felt like an eternity, Emily managed to pull Peter toward her and Mark, but it was already too late. The wounds from the shark attack were too severe, and Peter's body went limp in their arms. They tried to administer first aid, but it was clear that nothing could save him. The attack shocked the entire team. They immediately signaled for help, and a rescue boat arrived to take them back to shore. The atmosphere was filled with disbelief and sadness. Peter's injuries were too much, and he succumbed to the shark's attack, leaving the team and everyone involved in the restoration project heartbroken. The attack was a tragedy that shook the marine conservation community. Peter, who had joined the team with enthusiasm and a deep love for the ocean, was now gone. His death raised difficult questions about the safety of volunteers working in shark-prone areas and brought attention to the risks faced by those who dedicated themselves to ocean conservation. In the aftermath, the incident led to a re-examination of safety protocols. The conservation community, along with local authorities, realized that better preparation and safety measures were necessary to protect volunteers working in such hazardous environments. New guidelines were put in place to ensure that future workers would be better equipped to handle the unexpected dangers that could arise while working with the ocean's predators. After the tragic attack, the entire team returned to shore, their hearts heavy with grief. The team members, who had been so focused on their mission just moments before, were now grappling with the loss of their friend and colleague. Peter's death sent shockwaves through the marine conservation community, and many began questioning whether enough was being done to ensure the safety of volunteers in shark-prone areas. The group was left with a deep sadness that could not be easily shaken off. They knew that no matter how hard they worked to restore the coral reefs, they could never undo the tragedy they had just experienced. Emily, who had known Peter for years, found it especially hard to cope with the loss. As the lead biologist, she had always been the one to guide and protect her team, ensuring that everyone was prepared for the risks of working in the ocean. But in this situation, even her experience could not save Peter. She knew she had done everything she could, but the reality of the situation was undeniable. The shark attack had been sudden, and no one had expected it to happen. It was a reminder of the dangers that existed beneath the water's surface and how unpredictable the ocean could be. In the aftermath, the team spent a lot of time discussing what could be done to prevent such incidents in the future. They realized that while they could not change what had happened, they could make sure that future volunteers would be better prepared for the risks involved in working so close to the ocean's predators. The loss of Peter was a tragedy, but it also highlighted the need for better safety measures in marine conservation efforts. The local authorities in Florida quickly responded to the incident. They reviewed the existing safety protocols for volunteers working in areas with known shark populations. As a result, new safety guidelines were put into place. These new measures included more comprehensive training for volunteers, emphasizing how to respond to shark encounters and what steps to take in case of an emergency. The team would also be equipped with more advanced safety gear, including shark shields, which were designed to keep sharks at a distance. In addition to the new safety protocols, the tragedy also prompted a larger conversation about the risks faced by marine conservation workers. Many people had never considered the dangers that came with this type of work. While it was known that the ocean was home to many predators, including sharks, few had thought about the safety of the workers who spent so much time in the water. The incident sparked a wider conversation about how conservation efforts, while crucial, also came with a need for more protection for those involved. Emily and the rest of the team, while devastated by the loss, took solace in the fact that their work had not been in vain. They knew that Peter had been passionate about protecting the ocean and its creatures. His death, though tragic, had brought much-needed attention to the risks involved in marine conservation. As they continued their work, they did so with a renewed commitment to ensuring that future volunteers would be better protected from the dangers of the deep sea. Known for its golden sands, azure waters, and the lively bustle of tourists taking in the splendor of the Pacific Ocean, Waikiki Beach is located in Honolulu, Hawaii. But this peaceful paradise was the scene of a tragedy in 2014 that would linger on its shores for years to come. An experienced lifeguard named Marcus Torres was involved in a terrifying encounter with forces beyond his control on a humid August afternoon. It was a typical day at Waikiki Beach. Surfers danced on the waves, families stretched out under vibrant umbrellas, and snorkelers explored the reef off the coast. A calming background to the busy crowd was created by the rhythmic crash of waves and the aroma of salt and sunscreen carried by the trade winds. Just beyond the sands, Honolulu stood proudly with its rich history as a center of Polynesian culture and contemporary tourism. For almost 10 years, 29-year-old Marcus Torres had been working this section of the beach. He was more familiar with Waikiki's waters than most, having grown up on Oahu. Over the years, Marcus's instincts had saved countless lives, and his co-workers frequently made fun of the fact that he could smell a rip current before it even formed. In addition to being a lifeguard, he was a mainstay of Waikiki, renowned for his composure and unwavering concentration. But his abilities and bravery would be put to the ultimate test on this particular day. Marcus stood atop the lifeguard tower and looked out over the horizon as the afternoon wore on. There were very few rolling waves gently crashing against the shore, and the ocean was unusually calm. It was a false sense of security that could fool even the most seasoned swimmers. The swimmer flailing in the distance just outside the designated safe zone caught Marcus's attention as his gaze swept across the water. The swimmer appeared to have been entangled in a rip current and was later identified as 34-year-old New Zealand tourist Callum Henshaw. His desperate gestures alluded to panic, which was among the most hazardous emotions for anyone in open water. Marcus made a snap decision. He grabbed his rescue board, signaled his fellow lifeguards, and then ran toward the surf. The beachgoers focused on him, some even taking out their phones to record what they thought would be a standard rescue. It was difficult to paddle out to Callum. Marcus and the struggling swimmer were drawn further away from the beach by the powerful rip current, even though the water looked calm from the shore. As he approached, Marcus instructed Callum to remain composed and use his energy sparingly. However, something unexpected happened as Marcus got to him. A dark shadow moved quickly and purposefully beneath the surface. Suddenly, a huge bull shark surfaced from the ocean, its strong jaws snagging Marcus's left arm. Marcus had never experienced such intense pain, which shot through his entire body. After the shark's head violently thrashed, he was dragged into the water from the rescue board. Blood and foam swirled around them as the calm ocean surface erupted into chaos. Marcus's intuition took over. Despite the pain, he gave it his all in the fight. His free arm and legs were used to kick and punch the shark's eyes and gills, which were its most vulnerable areas. But the shark was unrelenting, pulling him deeper and deeper under the surface. Callum was paralyzed by fear and could only watch in horror while clinging to the rescue board. Although it was only a matter of seconds, the struggle felt like it went on forever. Marcus was able to escape the shark's hold, but not before suffering serious injuries. The skin on his arm was ripped and gushing blood. Marcus surfaced, gasping for air, weak from fatigue and blood loss. His strength was rapidly diminishing, but he knew he had to get Callum back to shore. Marcus's fellow lifeguards had arrived by now, including his longtime co-worker and close friend, Aidan Kahili. As another lifeguard assisted Callum, Aidan pulled Marcus onto his rescue board. The group paddled as fast as they could back to shore, their movements driven by desperation and adrenaline. There was a crowd on the beach, their faces marked with worry. Bystanders had called emergency personnel who were already waiting. Marcus lay on the sand, his body trembling and pale with shock. Tourniquets were applied to stop the bleeding, and oxygen was given to keep him conscious as paramedics rushed to stabilize him. It was evident that Marcus was seriously injured despite their best efforts. Despite not being physically hurt, Callum was clearly shaken. He repeatedly claimed to have seen the shark, which was about the size of a small car and had emotionless, cold eyes. For everyone in attendance, the fact that a routine rescue had turned into a nightmare was beginning to sink in. Marcus's injuries were too severe to be treated in a medical center in Honolulu. Shortly after arriving at the hospital, he passed away from trauma and blood loss. The community was rocked by the announcement. As a hero who defended Waikiki's coastlines and sacrificed his life to save another, Marcus Torres was more than just a lifeguard. Even though he was safe, Callum Henshaw found it difficult to deal with the trauma and guilt of the experience. Later, he referred to Marcus as a guardian angel and promised to support Hawaiian ocean safety initiatives in remembrance of his sacrifice. The local authorities also took action, enforcing more stringent safety regulations and raising awareness of the shark's presence in the region. Waikiki Beach remained unaffected by the tragedy, and it continued to attract visitors from all over the world. But the memory of Marcus Torres would always be weighed down by the Waikiki sands for those who knew him. In remembrance of the bravery and selflessness that characterized his life, Marcus's name was inscribed on a plaque near the lifeguard tower where he had served for so long. Marcus Torres's tragic and heroic tale serves as a sobering reminder of nature's erratic might. Marcus's deeds on that fateful day affected the community as a whole, not just the people he saved. Where the waves still crashed, eternal and unforgiving, his legacy endured in the hearts of those who walked Waikiki's shores. In the morning on July 18, 2008, the sun had just started to rise over the Gulf of Mexico, bathing the calm waters in a golden hue. The tranquil beauty and historic charm of the Floridian coastline were particularly well known in the area around the small fishing community of Cedar Key. With its small population and strong fishing heritage, Cedar Key had long served as a retreat for lonesome fishermen. Strong currents, erratic weather patterns, and occasionally the presence of large predators hiding beneath the waves made the Gulf dangerous despite its apparent calm. That day, 43-year-old veteran fisherman Robert Carter, who was well known for his solo excursions, embarked on what would sadly turn out to be his last expedition. Robert spent the majority of his life in Cedar Key. He had sun-weathered skin and was a wiry man, well known at the local marina. Even though his boat, the Marlin Bell, was only 18 feet long, it had been a reliable companion for many years. For Robert, fishing was more than just a job. It was a way to escape the routine of small-town life. He had only his boat, the Gulf, and his quiet resolve to catch the largest fish he could find. He had no family or close friends. That morning, he had decided to venture at least 15 miles offshore, outside of the typical locations preferred by local fishermen. He believed the prize catches he sought were in the deeper waters. Robert dropped his anchor into the still sea. Only the gentle lap of waves against the hull and the sporadic cries of gulls overhead could be heard, and the air smelled of salt and seaweed. Carefully preparing his rod and baiting his hook, he threw his line into the water. As the sun rose higher in the sky, Robert stayed calm. He had plenty of time, which was necessary for fishing. He sensed the first tug on his line at about noon. It was strong, a sign of a large fish. As he started to reel it in, his heart rate increased, causing the rod to bend under the pressure. Robert didn't know he wasn't alone. The area had been home to a 10-foot tiger shark, the top predator in the Gulf's waters. Although rare, tiger sharks, known for their vicious hunting methods and indiscriminate diet, were not unheard of in this region of the Gulf. The shark had probably been lured in by the vibrations from Robert's struggling catch and thought it would be an easy meal. Its striped body blended into the dark depths below as it silently circled the boat. Because he was so intent on his line, Robert failed to notice the dark shape approaching him or the slight ripple near the surface. As the fish's silvery form flashed just below the water, he kept drawing it closer. He was leaning over the side of the boat to get a better view when catastrophe struck. With a terrifying surge of speed, the tiger shark's jaws clamped down on Robert's left leg. He was almost swept overboard by the force of the attack, but he was able to seize the railing of the boat, screaming in pain. The shark's strong jaws trembled violently as it attempted to pull him into the water, its serrated teeth tearing through bone and muscle. As blood spurted from the wound, the water turned a deep red. Robert repeatedly struck the shark's snout with his free leg in a desperate attempt to survive. The shark finally let go of him after what seemed like an eternity, stopping briefly to circle the boat. Sweat and blood slicked Robert's hands as he pulled himself back onto the deck. His leg was severed, with the bone showing through the torn flesh. Although it was a terrifying sight, Robert's survival instincts took over. He was aware that he needed to stop the bleeding. Wincing as the pain increased, he tightened his belt around his thigh, using it as a makeshift tourniquet. His breathing was ragged, and his vision started to blur, but he refused to give up. The tiger shark wasn't finished. It began ramming the boat, its massive body causing the small vessel to rock dangerously. Each impact sent waves of fear through Robert. The boat, though sturdy, wasn't built to withstand such attacks. He reached for his radio, fumbling with trembling hands as he tried to call for help. The signal in this part of the Gulf was weak, but he managed to get through the Coast Guard. His voice was slurred from blood loss, but they understood enough to know he was in grave danger. Minutes felt like hours as Robert waited, his strength fading with each passing second. The shark continued its assault, ramming the boat again and again as though it could sense its prey was vulnerable. The water around the boat was still stained with blood, a grim reminder of the attack. Robert's thoughts grew hazy, his mind drifting between panic and resignation. He thought about the life he had lived, the choices he had made, and the irony of meeting his end in the very waters he had loved so much. By the time the Coast Guard arrived, it was too late. They found the Marlin Belle adrift, the hull battered but intact. Robert's lifeless body lay on the deck, his face pale and his leg wrapped tightly in the blood-soaked belt. The shark was nowhere to be seen, having vanished into the depths as quickly as it had appeared. The rescue crew, led by Officer Amelia Voss, was visibly shaken. Shark attacks were rare in the Gulf, and fatalities were even rarer. This was the kind of tragedy that would linger in their minds for years to come. The news of Robert Carter's death spread quickly through Cedar Key. The townsfolk, though accustomed to the dangers of the sea, were stunned by the brutality of the attack. Robert was buried in the town's small cemetery, his grave marked with a simple headstone. In his honor, the local fishermen organized a memorial fishing tournament, the proceeds of which went toward shark conservation efforts, a decision that sparked controversy but ultimately reflected the community's respect for the delicate balance of nature. In the years that followed, the story of Robert Carter's final fishing trip became something of a cautionary tale among the locals. His name was etched into the town's history, a reminder of both the beauty and the danger of the Gulf of Mexico. In 2010, the waters of the Australian state of Queensland were serene and welcoming, shrouded in the soft blackness of the night. Queensland's coastline attracted divers from all over the world because of its immaculate coral reefs and numerous shipwrecks. That year, a team of seasoned scuba divers embarked on a daring night dive near the wreckage of the SS Horizon, a ship that had lain untouched for decades after sinking in a cyclone. One of them, Jack Lewis, was an experienced diver who had spent years navigating dangerous underwater environments. Jack, a 36-year-old diver who loved the silent challenge of the deep, was self-assured and meticulous. Joining him were three others: Tamsin Croft, a marine enthusiast known for her fearless approach to underwater exploration; Ewan Price, a rookie diver eager to prove his worth; and their guide, Marcus Flannery, a local with an encyclopedic knowledge of the region's shipwrecks. The dive started incident-free. With their flashlights blazing through the darkness, the divers plunged into the cold waters and drew closer to the SS Horizon's eerie silhouette. Its rusting beams, covered in soft corals and teeming with marine life, stood eerily silent. To avoid disturbing the fragile ecosystem, Jack and the others moved slowly and deliberately. The group arrived at the shipwreck's lower decks around midnight. Jack examined the corroded structure a little before the others, following the outline of a once grand staircase now inhabited by sea anemones and sponges with his flashlight. Abruptly, he became aware of a commotion in the water. A brief shadow, a huge form that moved with predatory grace, appeared at the corner of his eye. Jack's flashlight beam momentarily illuminated the great white shark's massive body as it surfaced from the abyss. The shark suddenly lunged, clamping down on Jack's leg with its strong jaws. The other divers were confused by the shockwave the attack sent through the water. Jack fought, flailing against the shark's hold, but its power was too great. In a desperate attempt to pull Jack away, Tamsin, who was closest to him, instinctively swam toward him and grabbed his arm. Ewan and Marcus joined the fight immediately, but they couldn't hold on due to the shark's aggressive movements. The group's increasing panic was worsened by the blood clouding the water, which made it harder to see. The shark's predatory instincts were in full force as it pulled Jack into deeper waters. Unable to keep up, the other divers quickly surfaced, their minds racing to warn the boat's crew above. While the others described the terrifying events, Marcus radioed for emergency assistance once on board. Search operations began right away. The crew searched the area and turned on more lights, but the murky waters seemed unreachable. It wasn't until hours later that Jack's body was recovered, brought to the surface by rescue divers dispatched from the mainland. His body showed clear signs of a vicious shark attack, including numerous deep puncture wounds and widespread trauma typical of a great white shark bite. It was a tragedy that rocked the close-knit diving community. Investigators later determined that Jack's leg injury had likely severed a major artery, leading to his death before the shark released him. Since sharks were known to be more active hunters during the dive time, it was hypothesized that the predator had been drawn to the area by the noise made by the group. That night's events permanently altered Tamsin, Ewan, and Marcus. Tamsin, who had previously been fearless, now completely avoided night dives. Ewan abandoned diving altogether, shaken by the stark reminder of nature's unpredictability. Despite feeling guilty for failing to save Jack, Marcus continued working as a guide and took extra care to ensure his groups were safe. The attack reignited debates about the risks of night diving and the protocols in place to prevent such tragedies. Experts emphasized the importance of understanding shark behavior and respecting their habitats. Jack's death served as a somber reminder of the ocean's duality, its beauty, awe, and undeniable danger. In the years that followed, the SS Horizon continued to attract divers, though the memory of Jack Lewis's untimely death lingered, casting a shadow over the shipwreck's allure. For those who knew him, Jack's passion for the ocean and his adventurous spirit would forever define his legacy, a diver who braved the depths, even when they turned against him. It was January 18, 2008, off the southern coast of Australia near Port Lincoln, a spot well known for its dense population of great white sharks. This region of South Australia is part of the Great Australian Bight, a hotspot for marine life. It's famous among shark researchers and filmmakers who travel from around the world to study these predators in their natural habitat. The area's clear waters and frequent gatherings of great whites make it a prime location for documentaries. On this particular day, a small team of filmmakers was preparing to capture footage for a documentary about shark behavior. The team included 5 members: Ben Harris, the director and leader of the project; Evelyn Wagner, the marine biologist guiding the crew; Trevor Cole, the cameraman; Ryan Bell, an experienced diver; and Mia Mills, the assistant producer. They planned to record a rare event, a congregation of great white sharks feeding on a whale carcass discovered days earlier. The morning started early. The crew had boarded their research vessel, Ocean Pioneer, at dawn. Everyone was focused on the task ahead. Evelyn, the biologist, briefed the team on what to expect. Great whites, she explained, were apex predators. These sharks, which can grow up to 20 feet long, are drawn to large food sources, such as dead whales. While sharks generally avoid humans, their behavior can be unpredictable when they are in feeding mode. Ben listened closely, though his mind was on the logistics of the shoot. He was an experienced filmmaker, but this kind of underwater work carried unique challenges. The equipment was sensitive and the crew had limited time before the conditions changed. Trevor, the cameraman, carefully checked the underwater lights and camera rig. Bright lights could provoke sharks, but they were essential for capturing the images they needed in the deep. By mid-morning, the boat reached the location. The smell of the whale carcass hit them first, even before they saw it. The carcass floated on the surface, massive and decayed with chunks missing where sharks had been feeding. Around it, fins broke the water. At least 6 great whites were visible, circling the remains and occasionally lunging to tear off pieces of meat. The team had seen videos of scenes like this, but seeing it in person was something else entirely. The sharks moved with a mix of power and grace, their huge bodies cutting effortlessly through the water. The crew prepared to enter the water. Ryan, the diver, went over safety protocols. Their goal was to descend about 30 feet and stay on the outskirts of the feeding area to avoid disturbing the sharks. They would work quickly, spending no more than 20 minutes in the water. Ben gave the final signal and the divers geared up. Ben, Trevor, and Ryan would go in first, with Evelyn and Mia staying on the boat to monitor. The divers entered the water carefully, their movements slow to avoid attracting attention. As they descended, the view became clearer. Below them, the sharks were enormous. Their muscular bodies moved in calculated bursts as they approached the carcass, bit off chunks of flesh, and swam away to avoid competition. Trevor positioned himself near Ryan, holding the camera steady as he filmed the feeding frenzy. Ben directed them through hand signals, keeping them in formation. For the first 10 minutes, everything went according to plan. The sharks seemed focused on the whale carcass, paying little attention to the divers. Trevor captured close-up shots of the shark's jagged teeth and the raw intensity of the scene. Ryan floated nearby, ready to assist if needed. But then something changed. One of the sharks, a massive great white nearly 18 feet long, broke away from the group. It began circling the divers, moving closer with each pass. Evelyn, watching from the boat, noticed the shift in behavior and called out to Mia, signaling to alert the team. The divers, however, were already aware. Ryan tapped Trevor to signal that they should ascend slowly. But before they could act, the shark charged. The attack happened in seconds. The great white surged forward, targeting Ryan, who was closest to the camera lights. The shark clamped down on his leg, its teeth slicing through his wetsuit and into his flesh. Blood clouded the water as Ryan thrashed, trying to free himself. Trevor dropped the camera and grabbed Ryan's arm, pulling with all his strength. Ben joined in, kicking at the shark's side to drive it away. The shark released Ryan but didn't retreat. It circled back, this time targeting Trevor. It lunged again, its massive jaws snapping shut inches from him. The divers were now fighting for their lives, desperately trying to ascend while keeping an eye on the predator. Ben signaled for help from the boat, waving frantically toward Evelyn and Mia. On board, the support team sprang into action. They lowered a rescue line into the water as Evelyn shouted instructions. The shark continued to circle, its movements fast and aggressive. Blood from Ryan's leg injury seemed to intensify its interest. The crew on the boat pulled with everything they had, dragging the divers toward safety. As Trevor reached the surface, the shark struck again, this time slamming into Ben. Its powerful body knocked him off balance, and he disappeared beneath the surface. For a moment, there was chaos as everyone searched for him. When Ben surfaced again, his face was pale and his breathing was labored. The shark had torn into his side, leaving deep wounds, but he was still alive. Trevor and Ben managed to cling to the rescue line as the crew worked desperately to pull them aboard. Ryan, however, was still in the water, drifting and weakened from blood loss. The shark circled closer, its dorsal fin cutting through the waves. Evelyn leaned over the edge of the boat, gripping a pole, trying to push Ryan toward the rescue line. The predator struck again before they could pull him free, clamping down on Ryan's chest with devastating force. Blood filled the water as Ryan went limp. The crew screamed for him, but it was too late. The shark dragged him under and he did not resurface. On the boat, the scene was grim. Ben's side was torn open and Trevor had deep cuts on his arm from the frantic escape. Evelyn and Mia worked quickly to stop Ben's bleeding while the captain turned the vessel toward shore. Trevor sat in shock, his hands trembling as he stared at the spot where Ryan had been taken. The weight of what they had just witnessed hung heavily over them, and no one said much as the boat sped toward safety. The survivors replayed the events in their minds, trying to piece together what had gone wrong. The camera lights, they realized, might have provoked the shark. Great whites were known to react to flashes and sudden movements, and the feeding frenzy below had already heightened their aggression. Filming so close to a whale carcass had been a dangerous gamble, one they now knew they had underestimated. By the time they reached the dock, it was clear this incident would have far-reaching consequences. For the survivors, though, the focus was on the teammate they had lost and the injuries they carried. The ocean, they realized, was not a place to let down your guard. It demanded respect, and the price of underestimating it could be devastating. They say the Gulf of Mexico can be both a friend and a foe. On May 14, 2005, it felt like both. That day, the annual Open Water Swim Challenge off the coast of Panama City Beach, Florida, brought together swimmers from all over the country. For many, this event was about endurance, pushing their limits, and testing their skills in open water. But no one could have predicted how the race would end or the horror it would bring. Kevin Price, a 35-year-old experienced swimmer from Alabama, was among the competitors that day. He had trained for months, swimming laps at his local pool and braving lakes to mimic the open water conditions. The race started early in the morning. Kevin arrived on the beach just after sunrise, feeling the familiar mix of nerves and excitement. The crowd buzzed with energy as swimmers stretched and prepared their gear. You could feel the anticipation in the air as the organizers gave their final instructions. The Gulf's waters were calm and warm, inviting the swimmers to take on the challenge. But beneath the surface, the Gulf was alive with activity. This region is home to countless marine species, from playful dolphins to stingrays gliding along the seabed. It's also a hotspot for bull sharks. These sharks are powerful and aggressive, known to venture close to shore, especially when they sense movement or food. Swimmers in the area knew to respect these creatures, but no one expected a shark encounter during a race. The race began at 8 a.m. sharp. Kevin dove into the water with the first wave of competitors. The initial stretch was always the most chaotic, with dozens of swimmers splashing and jostling for position. Kevin kept a steady pace, his years of training guiding him through the early chaos. He focused on his breathing and the rhythm of his strokes, letting the noise of the crowd fade behind him. About an hour into the race, Kevin had settled into his groove. He swam alongside a small group of swimmers, each one focused on maintaining their pace. The open water felt endless, with only the occasional buoy to mark their progress. The shore was now a distant line on the horizon. Kevin felt strong and confident he could complete the race. But as the swimmers pushed farther into the Gulf, the water began to change. The group noticed fewer fish darting below them, and the usual sense of calm felt different. It was subtle at first, just a strange stillness, as if something nearby had shifted the balance of the water. Kevin and his swim partner, a fellow racer named John Vargas, were about 5 miles into the race when it happened. Without warning, a large, dark shadow emerged from the depths below. It moved fast, heading straight for the swimmers. Kevin didn't see it at first, but John did. He shouted and pointed, his voice frantic. That's when Kevin turned and saw the bull shark. Bull sharks are among the most dangerous species. They're aggressive and territorial, known to attack in shallow or murky waters. This shark was massive, over 10 feet long, and it had zeroed in on Kevin. Before he could react, the shark struck, its powerful jaws clamping down on his torso. The force of the attack knocked Kevin underwater. Blood clouded the water almost instantly, spreading in thick, dark clouds. Kevin struggled to break free, kicking and thrashing as the shark pulled him deeper. John, just feet away, froze for a moment in shock before shouting for help. Other swimmers stopped, turning toward the commotion, their faces filled with terror. Kevin fought with everything he had. His arms flailed, trying to push the shark away, but the predator was too strong. The shark shook its head violently, tearing into him with its razor-sharp teeth. Kevin managed to surface briefly, gasping for air and calling out, but the shark dragged him back under. John watched helplessly as Kevin disappeared beneath the surface, the water around him turning red. The scene was horrifying, like something out of a nightmare. The other swimmers could only tread water, waiting for the rescue team to arrive. On shore, the emergency team had already noticed the disturbance. Boats and jet skis rushed toward the area, their engines roaring as they cut through the water. Helicopters circled above, trying to locate Kevin in the chaos. The swimmers nearby tried to move away, some shouting directions to the rescue teams. The first rescue boat reached the scene minutes later, but by then, it was too late. The shark had dragged Kevin deeper, its movements leaving a trail of bubbles and blood. The rescuers threw ropes and flotation devices into the water, hoping to pull him up. But there was no response. The helicopter above spotted the shark briefly as it swam away, its massive body moving with purpose. Kevin's body surfaced moments later, lifeless and still. The rescuers pulled him onto the boat, their faces pale as they worked to stop the bleeding. But the injuries were too severe. The shark's attack had been quick and brutal, leaving no chance for survival. The remaining swimmers were quickly evacuated, and the race was canceled as news of the attack spread. Rescue boats and jet skis escorted them back to shore, where organizers and spectators waited in stunned silence. The beach, once filled with excitement, now felt heavy with grief. Experts later confirmed that the shark was likely a bull shark. Drawn to the area by the large group of swimmers, the splashing and movement had probably triggered its predatory instincts. Bull sharks are known to thrive in warm coastal waters like the Gulf of Mexico, where they hunt fish, rays, and sometimes larger prey. Attacks on humans are rare, but when they happen, they are often deadly. Kevin's death sent shockwaves through the swimming community. He had been a strong, skilled swimmer, someone who loved the water and respected its power. But on that day, the Gulf proved to be an unforgiving force. The annual open water swim challenge was suspended after the incident, leaving a lasting scar on the event's history. For those who were there, the memory of Kevin's struggle and the shark's sudden brutal attack remains a haunting reminder of the risks that come with venturing into open water. Never expect a night of fishing with friends to turn into a nightmare. On August 15, 2004, a group of 5 friends set out on a fishing trip off the coast of Puerto Rico. The Caribbean is famous for its rich marine life, and deep-sea fishing trips are popular among locals and tourists alike. That night, the group was hoping for big catches, maybe tuna or swordfish, as they anchored their boat miles from shore under the stars. The group included Luis Rivera, 34, the boat owner and an experienced fisherman, his cousin Jorge Morales, 28, their childhood friend Daniel Torres, 33, and 2 other friends, Marcos Rojas and Eric Martinez. They all lived in San Juan and often spent weekends together. But this trip was special. Luis had been talking about this fishing spot for weeks, describing it as the perfect place to catch something big. They left the marina just after sunset, their small fishing boat loaded with gear. The plan was simple: head out to the deep waters, drop lines, and fish through the night. Spirits were high as they passed the glowing coastline, joking and sharing stories about their past fishing adventures. Jorge, who had never been deep-sea fishing before, was especially excited. He'd spent days preparing, reading up on baiting techniques and packing snacks. By 2 a.m., they were far out in the Caribbean, where the water seemed endless. The boat rocked gently on the waves as they anchored and set up their lines. The men took turns monitoring the lines while others rested. The night was quiet except for the sound of the ocean and the occasional chatter among the group. About an hour later, one of the lines jerked violently. Daniel, who was closest, grabbed the rod and began reeling it in. Whatever was on the other end was strong. The rod bent under the pressure as Daniel shouted for help. Jorge and Luis rushed over, taking turns cranking the reel. The fish fought hard, thrashing in the water as it got closer to the boat. As they worked together, the water around the boat began to stir. At first, they thought it was just the fish struggling, but then a large shadow appeared beneath the surface. Luis, standing at the edge of the boat, leaned over to get a better look. That's when they saw it, a great white shark. Great white sharks are rare in the Caribbean, but not unheard of. These predators are known for their size and power, growing up to 20 feet long and weighing over 5,000 pounds. They hunt seals, fish, and other large marine animals, but they're also curious creatures drawn to disturbances in the water. The shark, attracted by the struggling fish, made its presence known quickly. It darted toward the catch, biting into the fish with such force that it nearly yanked the rod out of Daniel's hands. Everyone on the boat froze for a moment, watching the massive predator tear into the fish. Its dorsal fin broke the surface, sending ripples through the water. Luis tried to stay calm, but the tension on the boat was palpable. The men backed away from the edge, pulling their lines in to avoid further attention, but it was too late. The shark circled the boat, its movements slow and deliberate. The size of the creature was intimidating, easily 12 feet long with a broad, muscular body. Jorge, standing closest to the edge, reached out to pull in the last line. In an instant, the shark lunged. Its massive jaws clamped down on Jorge's arm, pulling him off balance and into the water. The others screamed, rushing to the side of the boat. Jorge surfaced briefly, thrashing and shouting before the shark dragged him under again. Luis and Daniel grabbed ropes and life rings, throwing them into the water. Marcos used a long pole to try to prod the shark away, but it didn't budge. The predator circled back, its dorsal fin cutting through the water like a blade. Jorge surfaced again, his movements weaker this time. Blood spread around him, turning the water red. Luis, desperate to save his cousin, tied a rope around his waist and prepared to jump in. Daniel and Marcos held him back, pleading with him to stay on the boat. The shark, now in a frenzy, lunged at Jorge again, its jaws clamping down on his torso. The force of the attack dragged Jorge farther from the boat. The group tried everything to reach him, but the shark was relentless. Each time they got close, the predator turned toward the boat, its massive body rocking the vessel. The men shouted and waved flashlights, hoping to scare it off, but the shark wasn't leaving. As the attack continued, the weather began to change. The calm seas turned choppy, and the wind picked up, making it harder to control the boat. The men realized they needed to call for help. Luis grabbed the radio and contacted the Coast Guard, describing their location and the emergency. The Coast Guard assured them that help was on the way, but the rough seas would slow their response. Meanwhile, the shark made one final lunge at Jorge before disappearing into the depths. The men searched the water desperately, but there was no sign of their friend. The realization hit them hard. Jorge was gone. The group sat in stunned silence, their hands trembling as they tried to process what had just happened. Luis steered the boat back toward shore, his face pale and his eyes filled with tears. When they finally reached the marina hours later, the Coast Guard and local authorities were waiting. The men recounted the attack, their voices shaky as they described the shark's size and aggression. Experts later confirmed that the predator was likely a great white, drawn to the area by the struggling fish and the commotion on the boat. Jorge's loss left a deep scar on the group. What started as a night of camaraderie and excitement had turned into a nightmare they would never forget. For Luis, the guilt of losing his cousin was overwhelming. The waters of the Caribbean, once a place of beauty and adventure, now carried a haunting memory for all who were there that night. The early morning of August 15, 2020, when Jake Morgan and his 16-year-old son Lucas set out on what they thought would be a peaceful fishing trip off Monterey Bay, California. The sun was just rising as they launched their small wooden fishing boat, the Seafarer, from a quiet marina. Fishing was a tradition in the Morgan family, passed down through generations, and Jake wanted to share that bond with his son, who was finally old enough to help with the nets and lines. Monterey Bay is a famous spot for marine life. It's part of a large marine sanctuary that draws visitors for whale watching, fishing, and diving. The waters teem with life. Sea lions, dolphins, and schools of tuna are common sights. But beneath the surface lurks a predator that commands respect: the great white shark. These powerful creatures are known to frequent the bay, especially during the late summer months when seals, one of their favorite prey, are plentiful. Shark encounters here aren't unheard of, but few expect a close encounter, let alone an attack. Jake and Lucas loaded the boat with fishing gear, a cooler of snacks, and a radio for emergencies. By 7 a.m., they had motored out about 3 miles from the shore. The water was calm and the day felt promising. Jake took the helm, steering toward an area where tuna schools were reported the day before. Lucas prepared the fishing net, eager to prove he could handle it. Father and son worked together as the hours passed, enjoying the quiet rhythm of casting and pulling lines. By mid-morning, their hard work paid off. Lucas spotted a large school of tuna beneath the surface. Jake quickly positioned the boat and they dropped the net. It didn't take long before they felt the heavy weight of a full catch. Lucas grinned as he helped his dad haul the net back on board, their excitement building as they glimpsed the wriggling silver bodies of fish. The boat rocked gently with the motion of their efforts. Then the water changed. It happened subtly at first, a strange churning below the surface near the boat. Jake noticed it immediately. The calm waters rippled unnaturally as if something massive was moving below. He told Lucas to steady himself as the boat swayed more aggressively. The first sighting came moments later. A dorsal fin, large and unmistakable, broke the surface just 10 feet from the boat. It was a great white shark, at least 16 feet long. Jake froze, his mind racing. He knew sharks were common in these waters, but this one wasn't acting like the others he had seen from afar. The shark began circling the boat, its body slicing through the water with precision. Jake and Lucas watched, their excitement giving way to tension. The tuna they had just pulled on board flopped around in the net, and the smell of fish blood filled the air. Jake realized the catch had likely drawn the shark closer, triggering its hunting instincts. The predator's behavior grew more aggressive. It stopped circling and swam straight at the boat, ramming the hull with a force that shook the entire vessel. Jake and Lucas stumbled, grabbing onto the sides to steady themselves. Jake shouted for Lucas to hold on as he rushed to the motor, trying to start it. The engine sputtered but didn't catch. Jake's hands trembled as he tried again, but the shark hit the boat a second time, this time harder. The impact knocked several fish overboard, creating an even stronger scent trail in the water. The shark circled again, faster now, as if testing its prey. Jake grabbed an oar, his heart pounding. Lucas clutched another, his face pale but determined to follow his father's lead. The next hit came suddenly. The shark slammed its massive body against the side of the boat, splintering part of the wooden hull. Water began to seep in, and Jake knew they were in serious trouble. Despite their efforts to fend it off, the shark kept coming. Its attacks were calculated, each one weakening the boat further. Jake and Lucas swung their oars, trying to keep the predator at bay. The shark dodged their attempts, its powerful tail creating waves that rocked the sinking boat. The final blow came minutes later. The shark lunged at the boat with its full weight, striking the already damaged hull. The wood gave way with a loud crack and water poured in. Jake yelled for Lucas to grab onto anything that could float as the boat began to break apart. The two scrambled onto a piece of debris, the remains of the deck, just as the seafarer sank beneath them. Stranded in open water, Jake and Lucas clung to the wreckage. The shark didn't leave. It circled them, its dorsal fin cutting through the waves, its eyes fixed on the two figures. They used their oars to keep it at a distance, but the predator was relentless, nudging the debris and snapping at anything within reach. Minutes felt like hours as they fought to stay afloat. Jake's mind raced, wondering if anyone had noticed their absence or if help would arrive in time. He spotted a flare gun floating nearby, a miracle among the chaos. Reaching for it, he fired into the air, praying someone would see it. The Coast Guard received the distress signal just after noon. A helicopter was dispatched, and its crew spotted the flare within minutes. As the chopper approached, Jake and Lucas saw it and felt a surge of hope. The shark, however, remained close, circling like it was waiting for an opportunity. The rescue was harrowing. The Coast Guard crew dropped a rope ladder into the water, and Jake urged Lucas to climb first. The boy hesitated, but Jake insisted. As Lucas began climbing, the shark made one last move, lunging at the wreckage. Jake swung his oar with all his strength, striking the shark's nose. The predator recoiled, giving them just enough time to escape. Jake followed Lucas up the ladder and both were pulled aboard the helicopter. The crew treated their minor injuries as the pilot flew them back to shore. Below, the remains of the seafarer drifted away, a stark reminder of the encounter they had barely survived. For Jake and Lucas, the experience changed everything. The sea, once a place of peace and connection, now held a deep, lasting fear. The great white shark had shown them its power, leaving them with a story they would never forget. On June 12, 2015, a group of scuba divers gathered at a small marina in Gansbaai, South Africa. Known as the Great White Shark Capital of the World, this coastal town attracts thrill-seekers and marine enthusiasts eager to experience its rich underwater life. The waters off Gansbaai are home to dense populations of sharks, seals, and fish, thanks to the nutrient-rich Benguela Current. While great white sharks are the main attraction, the area teems with other species, including bronze whalers, blacktip sharks, and ragged-tooth sharks. Rachel Harris, a 34-year-old marine biology enthusiast from the United Kingdom, was among the group of divers that morning. She had always dreamed of visiting South Africa to witness the ocean's most fearsome predators up close. This was her third day of diving on the trip, and she was thrilled about the chance to see great whites in their natural habitat. The other divers included seasoned travelers, a few locals, and an experienced dive guide named Simon Grant, who had led shark dives for over a decade. By 7:30 a.m., the group was aboard the Ocean Spirit, a sturdy dive boat that regularly operated off Dyer Island. The crew briefed the divers about the day's plan, safety protocols, and the conditions. Rachel listened intently, her excitement mounting. The group was scheduled to dive near a reef where baitfish often gathered, creating bait balls, tight schools of fish that attract predators like sharks and dolphins. The boat reached the dive site at 9 a.m., and the crew dropped anchor. The divers suited up, checked their oxygen tanks, and entered the water in pairs. The ocean was clear, offering excellent visibility. Rachel felt a surge of adrenaline as she descended, following Simon's lead. The underwater world was alive with movement. Schools of fish darted around the reef, their silvery bodies flashing in the sunlight that filtered through the water. Smaller sharks, like blacktips, circled at a distance, curious but not aggressive. Rachel marveled at the sight, using her underwater camera to capture the scene. About 20 minutes into the dive, the first sign of trouble appeared. A school of baitfish rushed toward the reef, moving frantically as if fleeing something. The divers paused, watching as the water around them darkened with thousands of fish. Simon signaled for the group to stay close together. Then, the sharks arrived. It started with a few bronze whalers darting through the bait ball, snapping at the fish. Within seconds, the scene turned chaotic. More sharks appeared, drawn by the commotion and the scent of fish oil in the water. The predators moved with lightning speed, their sleek bodies cutting through the bait ball. Rachel was mesmerized. She had read about feeding frenzies but had never imagined witnessing one. She hovered near the edge of the group, captivated by the spectacle. But as the frenzy intensified, her awe turned to unease. A 15-foot great white shark emerged from the depths, its massive body moving with purpose. Unlike the smaller sharks, which darted through the bait ball in short bursts, the great white moved methodically, its eyes fixed on the activity near the reef. Rachel felt a jolt of fear as it swam past her, its size dwarfing everything around it. The shark began circling the group, its movements slow and deliberate. The smaller sharks gave way, sensing the dominance of the apex predator. Simon motioned for the divers to ascend slowly, signaling that it was time to end the dive. As the group began their ascent, Rachel lagged. She couldn't tear her eyes away from the great white, which now glided closer to the divers. She raised her camera for one last shot, her attention entirely focused on the shark. The great white made its move. It surged forward, snapping at Rachel's fins. The sudden attack sent her spinning, and she struggled to regain her balance. Her oxygen tank shifted, the straps loosening under the force of the shark's strike. Panic set in as she flailed, her movements attracting even more aggression. Simon acted quickly. He swam toward Rachel, holding a spear used for emergencies. He jabbed it at the shark, striking its side and forcing it to retreat momentarily. Rachel's breathing was erratic, her panic making it harder for her to stay buoyant. The great white circled again, undeterred by the spear. Simon signaled for the rest of the group to form a tight cluster. The divers huddled together, using their fins and equipment to appear larger and more threatening. Rachel clung to Simon, her oxygen tank slipping further. Another diver helped secure the tank, but Rachel was weak, her movements slowing as shock set in. The great white charged once more, this time aiming for the group. Simon struck it again with the spear, hitting its snout. The shark turned sharply, retreating a few meters before resuming its slow, menacing circle. Above, the crew on the dive boat realized something was wrong. They began pulling the group up using the safety lines attached to the divers' gear. One by one, the divers were hauled out of the water. Rachel was the last to ascend, her injuries making the process slower and more perilous. As she was lifted onto the boat, the great white made one final pass, its massive tail creating a powerful current that rocked the divers in the water. The crew pulled Simon and the remaining divers aboard just as the shark disappeared into the depths. Rachel lay on the deck, bleeding from deep gashes on her leg and foot. The crew applied pressure to the wounds while radioing for emergency assistance. The other divers sat in stunned silence, shaken by the encounter. The Ocean Spirit sped back to shore, where an ambulance waited. Rachel was rushed to the hospital, her injuries requiring surgery. She survived the ordeal, but the scars, both physical and emotional, would stay with her. The story of the attack quickly spread, capturing the attention of media outlets worldwide. Video footage taken by one of the divers went viral, showing the feeding frenzy and the great white's aggressive behavior. The incident reignited debates about the ethics of shark tourism, with critics arguing that activities like baiting disrupt the natural behavior of these animals. For Rachel, the dive that began as a dream turned into a nightmare she would never forget. The ocean, with all its beauty and danger, had shown her both sides of its nature in a single harrowing moment. It was July 14, 2010. And a group of tourists aboard the luxury yacht Ocean Star was enjoying a dream vacation in the turquoise waters of the Bahamas. The day had started with clear skies and calm seas, perfect conditions for exploring the shallow reefs near Andros Island. The yacht carried 8 passengers, including a couple on their honeymoon, a retired professor, and a young family. The crew of 4, led by Captain William Grant, had assured everyone of a safe and relaxing journey. Among the passengers was Elena Martinez, a 32-year-old graphic designer from Miami, who had saved for years to take this trip. She came with her fiancé, Rob Carter, a 35-year-old software engineer. The two planned to spend the day snorkeling and enjoying the pristine beauty of the area. The yacht cruised smoothly through the water, its powerful engines cutting a path toward the famous tongue of the ocean, a deep trench known for its marine life. By mid-morning, the yacht reached a shallow reef area where the group planned to snorkel. As the engine slowed, something unexpected happened. The yacht hit a hidden sandbar with a loud jolt, bringing it to an abrupt halt. The impact threw passengers off balance, and the crew scrambled to assess the situation. The sandbar had damaged the yacht's propellers, leaving it stuck and vulnerable. Worse, the collision had churned up sediment and injured several fish caught in the blades, releasing blood into the water. The crew tried to reverse the yacht off the sandbar, but the damage was too severe. The yacht began to tilt slightly, and Captain Grant announced they would need to deploy the inflatable rescue raft as a precaution. As the crew worked on the raft, the first sign of danger appeared. A large dorsal fin broke the surface near the yacht. It was a great white shark, estimated at over 16 feet long. Although great whites are rare in the Bahamas, they occasionally roam these waters, drawn by the abundance of marine life. The passengers watched nervously as the shark circled the yacht, its movements slow and deliberate. The shark's behavior quickly grew more aggressive. It approached the back of the yacht, bumping against the hull with enough force to make it shudder. The passengers and crew were startled, realizing the shark was testing its environment. The yacht, already taking on water, groaned under the strain. The crew inflated the rescue raft and helped the passengers climb aboard. The raft, designed for emergencies, could hold up to 12 people, but offered little protection against a predator of this size. Supplies were limited: bottled water, a first aid kit, a few flares, and 2 paddles. As the last person boarded the raft, the yacht began to sink slowly, leaving the group fully exposed. The shark seemed to sense the shift. It turned its attention to the raft, circling closer with each pass. The passengers sat huddled together, clutching the sides of the raft as the shark's fin cut through the water. Elena gripped Rob's hand tightly, her heart pounding as the predator's massive body brushed against the raft's edge. Minutes turned into an hour, and the shark's behavior became more erratic. It lunged at the raft several times, its powerful jaws snapping at the inflated sides. The group used the paddles to push it away, but the shark wasn't deterred. Each lunge left small tears on the raft's surface, causing air to slowly escape. The crew tried to signal for help using flares, but the yacht's distress beacon had been damaged in the collision. Their only hope was that another vessel in the area might see the flares or hear their calls over the radio. In the meantime, they worked to keep the shark at bay. As the sun climbed higher, the group's supplies began to dwindle. The tropical heat was relentless, and the passengers grew weaker from dehydration and fear. The shark showed no signs of leaving, its dark silhouette circling just beneath the surface. At one point, the shark launched a powerful attack, biting into the edge of the raft and pulling it partially underwater. Water flooded the bottom, soaking everyone inside. The passengers screamed and scrambled to keep their balance as the shark thrashed. Its jaws locked onto the raft's side. One of the crew members used a paddle to strike the shark's nose, forcing it to release its grip. For a brief moment, the shark disappeared. The group dared to hope it had finally given up, but the respite didn't last long. The fin reappeared closer than before, and the predator resumed its menacing circles. As the hours dragged on, the group's situation grew increasingly dire. The raft was leaking air, supplies were nearly gone, and the shark's persistence showed no signs of waning. The passengers sat in stunned silence, too exhausted and terrified to speak. Finally, just before sunset, a faint hum broke the silence. A rescue boat appeared on the horizon, its crew waving as it approached. Relief swept through the group as the boat drew closer, its engine loud enough to startle the shark. The predator hesitated, circling one last time before retreating into the deep. The rescue crew worked quickly to pull the passengers aboard, tending to their injuries and providing water. The shark remained out of sight, leaving behind only the shredded remains of the raft as evidence of its attack. For Elena, Rob, and the others, the ordeal was a stark reminder of the ocean's unpredictable power. What began as a luxury adventure had turned into a fight for survival, one they would never forget. On January 14, 2025, the Larson family, consisting of Mother Allison, Father Dave, and their teenage daughter Emily, embarked on a dream vacation aboard a luxury cruise ship in the Caribbean. The family was known for their close bond and love for travel. They lived in a quiet suburb in California where Dave worked as an architect and Allison managed a small bakery. Emily, a high school senior, was an aspiring writer who often documented their adventures in her journal. This trip was meant to be a celebration of Emily's upcoming graduation and a chance to create lasting memories together. The ship sailed smoothly for several days, offering breathtaking views of the turquoise waters and vibrant islands. The Larsons enjoyed every moment, from lavish dinners to exploring ports. Emily often marveled at the vastness of the ocean, her journal filled with sketches of the waves and notes about the beauty surrounding them. Allison loved watching her daughter's creativity flourish, while Dave took pride in providing such an unforgettable experience for his family. However, on that fateful night, the weather took a drastic turn. A violent storm descended upon the region, with strong winds and towering waves rocking the ship. Many passengers sought refuge in their cabins, but the Larsons, curious and unaware of the storm's severity, ventured onto the deck to witness the raw power of nature. The howling wind and crashing waves created an atmosphere of chaos and uncertainty. The ship's crew urged passengers to move indoors, but before the Larsons could react, a massive wave slammed against the ship. The impact was sudden and devastating. The force of the wave threw the family over the railing and into the dark, cold waters below. Panic set in as they were tossed about by the relentless waves. Dave, who had been closest to the edge, hit the water hard, injuring his leg severely. Allison screamed for her family, her voice drowned out by the storm. Emily, terrified and disoriented, struggled to keep afloat. As the storm raged, the cruise ship's crew focused on securing the vessel and ensuring passenger safety. Despite their efforts, the storm's intensity made it hard to locate those thrown overboard. The ship's searchlight scanned the turbulent waters, but the chaos made it nearly impossible to spot the Larsons' life raft. Meanwhile, the family struggled in the violent sea without aid from the ship. The crew was unaware of their location, and by the time the storm subsided, it was too late to intervene. In the chaos, they managed to find a life raft drifting nearby. Clinging to it with all their strength, the Larsons tried to stay together. The sea was merciless, and the cold water sapped their energy. Dave's injury left him unable to swim effectively, and his pain was evident in his strained attempts to stay conscious. Allison held on to Emily, whispering words of reassurance, even as the storm showed no signs of letting up. Emily's fear paralyzed her as she clutched the raft, unable to speak or move. As the storm subsided, the Larsons were adrift in the vast ocean. The once beautiful waters now felt endless and threatening. Far from the ship, surrounded by darkness, they were unaware of the danger below. The scent of blood from Dave's wounds began to attract predators, leaving the family vulnerable, exhausted, and at the mercy of the sea. As dawn approached, the ocean seemed calmer, but the Larson family remained vulnerable. The life raft rocked gently, carrying them aimlessly across the vast expanse of water. Allison cradled Emily, whose body trembled from exhaustion and fear. Dave lay motionless beside them, his face pale and his injured leg leaving a faint trail in the water. The calm surface of the sea held a deceptive tranquility, masking the dangers lurking beneath. The first sign of a new threat came as small ripples disturbed the surface nearby. Allison noticed fins breaking through the water, circling their fragile raft. The predators had been drawn by the scent of blood from Dave's injury. As the shapes came closer, the unmistakable outlines of great white sharks became clear. Allison tightened her grip on Emily, her heart racing as she tried to shield her daughter from the looming danger. The sharks circled them with calculated movements, their presence growing more menacing by the second. Suddenly, one of the creatures surged forward, its powerful body colliding with the raft. The impact jolted the family, nearly overturning their fragile sanctuary. Emily screamed, her voice filled with raw terror as she clung to the edge of the raft. Dave, weak and unable to move, could only watch helplessly. The relentless sharks continued their attack. Another lunge sent water splashing over the Larsons, soaking them to the bone. One shark struck again with terrifying force, its massive jaws snapping dangerously close to Emily. In a single, horrifying moment, the shark grabbed Emily and pulled her into the water. Allison's desperate attempts to reach her daughter were futile, her outstretched arms finding only empty space. Emily's cries were cut short as the ocean consumed her. Driven by a father's instinct to protect his child, Dave tried to move despite his injury. As he struggled, another shark targeted him, pulling him beneath the surface in a violent spray of water and blood. Allison's anguished screams echoed across the waves as she helplessly watched the unimaginable unfold. Alone on the raft, her strength and will began to falter. The night stretched on, leaving Allison adrift in her grief. The sharks, satisfied, vanished into the depths, leaving only an eerie silence behind. Allison's energy waned as exhaustion and hypothermia took their toll. When the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, the raft drifted quietly, the sea now calm and unyielding. By morning, Allison's body succumbed and she slipped into the water, her struggle finally at an end. News of the tragedy shocked the community and beyond. The cruise line faced intense scrutiny for failing to protect passengers, prompting investigations into its safety protocols. The incident reignited debates about shark behavior and the ethics of tourism in wildlife-prone areas. The Larson family's story served as a grim reminder of nature's power and the fragility of human life. In July 2021, the sun shone brightly over the tranquil waters of Hanalei Bay in Kauai, Hawaii. The turquoise waves gently lapped against the shore, providing the perfect setting for a relaxing swim. Maria, 8 months pregnant, walked hand in hand with her husband Daniel. They were on a much-needed vacation, cherishing the calm before welcoming their first child. Maria, a dedicated school teacher from Seattle, and Daniel, a software engineer, had spent the past months preparing for parenthood. This trip was their moment to reconnect and unwind before their lives changed forever. Maria had always loved the ocean. Growing up near the coast, she found peace in the rhythm of the waves. Even during her pregnancy, swimming helped her stay active and centered. That morning, she decided to enjoy a swim near the coral reef, while Daniel stayed close by to watch over her. The warm water embraced her as she swam, feeling weightless and free. She admired the colorful fish darting through the coral below, unaware of the danger lurking nearby. Beneath the surface, a tiger shark nearly 10 feet long glided silently. It had been drawn closer to shore by the abundance of fish near the reef. Unbeknownst to Maria, her movements caught the shark's attention. Startled by her presence, the predator began to circle cautiously. As Maria continued to swim, she felt a subtle disturbance beneath the surface, as if something was watching her. The water around her shifted unnaturally, sending a chill up her spine. Suddenly, a sharp tug at her leg jolted her, and before she could react, the shark's teeth sank into her calf. The pain was immediate and searing, radiating through her body like a fire. Her heart raced as the horrifying realization set in. She kicked fiercely, her body thrashing in desperation. The water around her turned crimson, the dark red spreading like a warning as panic surged through her veins. On the shore, Daniel spotted the chaotic splashing and yelled for help. His voice strained with urgency as he plunged into the water. The shark released her momentarily, but it wasn't gone. It lingered just below the surface, its menacing shadow circling closer. Maria fought to stay afloat, her limbs growing heavy with each passing second, her strength draining from the blood she was losing. Daniel reached her side, his mind racing with fear and adrenaline. But before they could make any progress, the shark lunged again. This time it sank its teeth deep into her side, ripping through flesh and bone with a brutal, jagged force. Maria cried out in pain, her breaths coming in short gasps as the shock set in. A nearby boat noticed the commotion and sped toward them. The crew threw a flotation device to Daniel, who grabbed it tightly while still holding on to Maria. They pulled the couple aboard, their faces pale with fear. Blood soaked through Maria's clothes as the crew quickly worked to stabilize her. Every second felt like an eternity as they raced toward the shore, where emergency responders waited. As the boat approached the dock, Maria's condition worsened. Her strength faded, and she struggled to stay conscious. Her leg and side bore deep wounds, causing significant blood loss. The combination of the injuries and her advanced pregnancy placed her in grave danger. The rescue team prepared to rush her to the hospital, knowing time was critical. Maria was rushed from the dock to the nearest hospital in Kauai. Paramedics worked quickly, administering fluids and trying to control the bleeding. Her wounds were deep and severe. Throughout the ambulance ride, her breathing was shallow and her skin was pale from the significant blood loss. Daniel stayed by her side, his face etched with fear and helplessness. At the hospital, a team of surgeons prepared for an emergency operation. Maria's condition was fragile due to her advanced pregnancy and the trauma she had endured. As doctors worked to save her life, they also had to consider the safety of her unborn child. The deep wounds and loss of blood had put her body under immense stress, triggering premature labor. Maria was taken to the operating room, where medical staff tried to stabilize her and deliver the baby safely. After hours of surgery, Maria's baby boy was delivered prematurely, but alive. The doctors noted that the trauma had caused complications, but the sound of the baby's cries brought a glimmer of relief to the medical team. Maria remained unconscious in the intensive care unit, her body fighting to recover from both the injuries and the delivery. The staff remained on high alert, fully aware that her condition was still critical and that every moment counted. The next few days were filled with uncertainty. Maria's body began to show signs of healing, but the emotional scars from the attack were already evident. Daniel cared for their newborn son, who remained in the neonatal intensive care unit due to his premature birth. He visited Maria whenever he could, offering her quiet support as she slowly regained strength. News of the shark attack spread quickly, sparking a wave of concern among locals and tourists. The once peaceful waters of Hanalei Bay now carried a sense of unease. Authorities increased patrols in the area, warning swimmers and divers to stay vigilant. Researchers emphasized the rarity of such attacks, explaining that tiger sharks often mistake humans for prey when startled or curious. For Maria, life after the attack was never the same. She faced months of physical therapy to regain mobility in her injured leg. The deep gash in her side healed slowly, but the trauma lingered in her mind. She struggled with anxiety and avoided the water, a stark contrast to her earlier love for the ocean. Daniel supported her through each step of the recovery, balancing his time between caring for Maria and their newborn son. The family eventually returned to Seattle, hoping for a fresh start away from the painful memories of Kauai. Maria focused on her son's health and her recovery, determined to overcome the fear and challenges that had taken hold of her life. Though the scars from that day would never completely fade, she drew strength from her family, who had endured the unimaginable together. January 2025. A bright summer morning greeted a group of tourists on the coast of South Africa. The calm waters of False Bay, a place known for its picturesque beauty and diverse marine life, seemed perfect for kayaking. The group of 6 tourists included Alan, a middle-aged adventure enthusiast from Scotland, Rachel and Peter, a young couple on their honeymoon, and Mia, a university student from Germany traveling solo. They were joined by 2 others, Raj and Priya, siblings from India who enjoyed outdoor sports. Leading the session was Thomas, an experienced local guide with years of expertise in the region's waters. Thomas started the day by explaining safety rules and demonstrating paddling techniques. He highlighted the importance of staying together and respecting the ocean's unpredictable nature. The group set out in bright yellow kayaks, their laughter and excitement echoing across the bay. For most, it was their first time kayaking, and they felt a mix of nervousness and exhilaration. The bay sparkled under the sunlight as the kayakers glided through the water, taking in the breathtaking scenery. Schools of fish swam beneath their kayaks, and seabirds soared overhead. The serene environment seemed to promise an unforgettable experience. Alan paddled a little ahead of the group, his curiosity urging him to explore more. Thomas noticed this and reminded him to stay close, but Alan's adventurous spirit led him slightly farther than advised. Unbeknownst to the group, the waters beneath held a lurking danger. False Bay was not only known for its beauty but also for being home to great white sharks. Without warning, a massive shark surged from the depths, slamming into Alan's kayak with terrifying force. The impact sent the kayak tumbling, plunging him into the water. The violent collision left Alan disoriented, struggling to keep his head above the surface. The group froze in shock, their minds racing as they realized the gravity of the situation. Thomas quickly urged the others to stay close and remain calm, but panic had already begun to set in. The shark reappeared, targeting Alan. It lunged, sinking its teeth deep into his leg, causing horrific injuries and leaving a crimson trail in the water. Alan screamed in agony, clinging to the overturned kayak. Thomas paddled toward him with all his strength, shouting for Alan to grab hold of his kayak. For a brief moment, the shark disappeared, offering a sliver of hope. Thomas reached out and managed to secure Alan's arm, but in a flash, the shark returned with terrifying speed. It struck again, pulling Alan beneath the water. Despite Thomas's desperate, futile attempts to pull him to safety, the remaining tourists could only watch in horror, unable to do anything but cling to their kayaks. The once peaceful bay was now a scene of chaos and fear. Thomas managed to guide the others toward the shoreline, but the loss of Alan left a heavy silence among them. They reached the shore shaken and heartbroken. Their day of adventure turned into a nightmare that none would ever forget. The group reached the shore in complete shock, their minds reeling from the horrifying events they had just witnessed. Thomas, the guide, tried to remain composed, but the weight of what had happened was evident in his every movement. He immediately checked on the remaining tourists, ensuring they were uninjured, though their pale faces and trembling hands reflected the emotional toll of the attack. As the weight of Alan's absence settled over the group, a heavy silence took hold. His injuries from the shark attack had been too severe, and the moment he was dragged under the water, any hope for survival had vanished. The once inviting, calm waters of False Bay now felt transformed, haunted by fear and the profound sense of loss. Thomas contacted emergency services and reported the incident, providing details about the attack and the area where it occurred. Local authorities responded quickly, dispatching a marine safety team to assess the waters and search for Alan's remains. Helicopters and boats arrived, scouring the bay for hours, but there was no trace of him. His body was never recovered, and the search was called off by nightfall, leaving the group with unanswered questions. The news of the attack spread quickly, drawing attention from both local and international media. False Bay, long known for its shark population, now faced renewed scrutiny. Questions arose about whether more could have been done to prevent such tragedies, especially for tourists unfamiliar with the dangers of the area. In the days that followed, the remaining group members struggled to process their emotions. For Rachel and Peter, their honeymoon took on a somber note, the joy of their trip overshadowed by the tragedy. Mia, who had come to South Africa seeking adventure, was haunted by memories of the attack. Raj and Priya, known for their adventurous spirit, expressed doubts about ever returning to the water again. The local community also felt the impact of the incident. Many residents of False Bay relied on tourism for their livelihoods, and the attack raised concerns about the future of water-based activities in the area. Shark experts and marine biologists emphasized the need for education and awareness, explaining that sharks were not intentionally targeting humans, but were often curious or mistaking them for prey. In response to the tragedy, Local authorities and tour operators implemented new safety measures for kayaking and similar activities. These included mandatory briefings on shark behavior, designated safe zones for water sports, and increased patrols in areas known for shark sightings. While these measures aimed to reassure both locals and visitors, they could not erase the pain felt by those directly affected by the incident. For Thomas, the attack remained a deeply personal loss. As a guide, he had always prioritized safety, and the memory of that day stayed with him as a reminder of nature's unpredictability. The group of tourists eventually returned home, carrying with them a shared experience that had forever altered their lives. Though False Bay continued to attract visitors, the memory of Alan's tragic fate lingered, serving as a solemn reminder of the need for caution and respect in the face of nature's power. And wealthy partygoers planned to spend New Year's Eve 2024 on the 50-foot luxury yacht known as the Elysian Sky, enjoying a night of luxury, fireworks, and laughter. A few miles off the coast of Santa Cruz, California, the sleek white ship was anchored close to a secluded cove where the Pacific Ocean's dark, limitless waters stretched to the horizon. Rich tech entrepreneurs, socialites, and their friends had chosen this location to celebrate the year's end in seclusion, away from prying eyes. But beneath the chilly waves, the night would end horribly. The Elysian Sky had departed earlier in the day, heading toward the remote coastline near Wild Ranch Park and leaving the busy Santa Cruz harbor behind. Shark sightings were notorious in this region, which is renowned for its pristine waters and craggy cliffs. Local fishermen frequently mentioned in whispered tones the devil of the deep, a huge great white shark that had been spotted cruising the area for years. While most small boats avoided the region due to local lore, the partygoers on the Elysian Sky dismissed it as little more than a ghost story. They were too focused on the champagne, fine food, and live disc jockey to consider the dangers lurking nearby. The owner of the yacht, Alaric Voss, a 42-year-old tech tycoon, went all out for the evening. The ship featured an upper-deck dance floor, a fully stocked bar, and stunning string lights. The passengers included his business partner, Dorian Latch, his fiancée, Isla Perot, and his friend, 29-year-old former model Sienna Graves. Social media influencer Zara Nix, lawyer Cassian Rook, and 4 other people, whose lives would also be taken by the sea that evening, were also on board. The celebration was in full swing as the sun sank below the horizon, illuminating the ocean with deep orange and purple hues. Across the water, glasses clinked, laughter resounded, and music blared. Ewan Crenshaw, the yacht's seasoned sailor and captain, had anchored the ship in a quiet, protected spot. The dangers lurking beneath them were unknown to the guests. Not long after midnight, it began. A fireworks show was about to start when the first impact occurred. Suddenly, the yacht trembled violently, causing several people to stumble. Captain Crenshaw felt the distinct force of something hitting the hull, but most people assumed it was a mechanical problem or a rogue wave. He rushed to the bridge, searching for any indication of trouble in the dark waters, his face pale. The second blow came, louder and harder. A spooky screech reverberated throughout the ship as metal groaned and the hull bowed inward. As the passengers' panic spread, they hurried to the railings to look out into the pitch-black sea. When they did, they noticed a huge, slow-moving shadow circling the yacht. A great white shark, easily 6 meters long, broke the surface of the water with its dorsal fin, which rippled unnaturally. It confirmed Captain Crenshaw's worst suspicions. This shark wasn't like the others. The predator, known as the Giant, was so enormous that it dwarfed even the largest known members of its species. With fury, the third blow came. The shark struck the side of the boat with its enormous head, acting as a battering ram. Just above the waterline, the impact ripped a hole in the hull. As the Elysian Sky started to tilt, water poured in. Despite the commotion, Alaric Voss yelled for everyone to put on life jackets. As they slipped on the slippery, tilting deck, people screamed. A few tried to get their phones back to call for assistance, but this far out at sea, the signal was poor. Passengers were flung into the water as the boat listed further. Still holding a champagne glass, Sienna Graves fell overboard, her shrill cry piercing the darkness. Desperate to keep her expensive purse intact, Zara Nix dove in after her. The shark persisted despite the people who clung to furniture, railings, and one another. It struck the ship once more, and this time the stern of the yacht plunged deeply beneath the water. To maintain order, Captain Crenshaw yelled instructions to the passengers in the water and tossed life rings. However, the shark had already begun to circle its victims. The initial assault was swift. Suddenly, Sienna was dragged under as she thrashed in the water. Silence replaced her screams. Moments after he had rushed to her aid, Cassian Rook suffered the same fate. The yacht's survivors watched in helpless horror as the water churned red. The Elysian Sky was rapidly sinking. Alaric Voss and Dorian Latch succeeded in setting up an inflatable raft, but the shark attacked once more as they attempted to board it. They were thrown into the water when the raft was overturned by the force. Alaric's cries of desperation were silenced in a matter of seconds as he vanished beneath the waves. A piece of floating debris, which served as a beacon for the predator below, was within reach of Dorian, who was bleeding from a gash on his leg. After a while, the yacht groaned and sank, taking Captain Crenshaw with it. The survivors held on to anything that floated, such as seat cushions or pieces of wood. The shark, however, was unforgiving. It killed off the survivors one by one. Screaming her fiancé's name, Isla Perot, who had survived by wearing a life jacket, was pulled beneath the surface. Zara Nix was nowhere to be found, even though her designer bag was now floating close by. Hours later, when the Coast Guard finally arrived, the sea was eerily silent. Only one survivor, Dorian Latch, and the dispersed debris were visible due to the searchlights. He had survived by clinging to a fragment of the yacht's broken mast. He was barely conscious due to a severe wound to his leg, but he survived to tell the story. Everybody else on board the Elysian Sky had been eaten or drowned. Investigators used Dorian's account to piece together the horrifying events that transpired. The shark's unusually aggressive behavior was thought to be caused by either territorial instincts or vibrations from the yacht's music, according to marine biologists. Eventually, the Elysian Sky's wreckage was found, and the deep gouges and punctures on its hull were consistent with a great white shark's bite force. Global media coverage of the tragedy sparked discussions about protecting wildlife and human encroachment on marine habitats. Despite his struggles with post-traumatic stress disorder and survivor's guilt, Dorian Latch, the only survivor, reluctantly became a celebrity. He was determined to find purpose in the nightmare he had experienced and later donated millions to ocean preservation and shark research. Only fear and conjecture remained after the great white shark disappeared back into the depths. For those who disregarded the cautions, the story of the Elysian Sky was a sobering reminder of the ocean's lethal force. Massachusetts seaside town of Wellfleet was bustling with summer activity on a warm August afternoon in 2011. Situated on the eastern coast of Cape Cod, Wellfleet was renowned for its immaculate beaches, undulating dunes, and chilly Atlantic Ocean waters. Due to its untamed beauty and promise of adventure, the region has been a popular destination for surfers, tourists, and nature lovers for many years. A predator, however, had started to retake its old hunting grounds beneath the glistening waves. Once uncommon in the area, great white sharks have been gradually returning to Cape Cod's waters in recent years. The resurgence of seal populations, partly due to the Marine Mammal Protection Act, had created a plentiful food supply for predators. Although Cape Codders knew there was a risk, they usually responded detachedly when shark sightings were reported. Nobody believed that they could experience it. Among those who dismissed the threat was Connor James, a 17-year-old student of Eastham High School. Connor loved surfing and swimming, and he and his friends had been at Newcomb Hollow Beach almost every summer weekend. They had a favorite spot, a long stretch of sand with waves that attracted surfers from all over the state. Teenagers who thrived on adventure and adrenaline, Connor was known for being fearless. He would surf through a hurricane if given the opportunity, according to a common joke among his friends. Like many Saturdays, this one got underway. Brody Larkins, Ezra Whitlow, and Kellen Roke, along with Connor, had reached the beach shortly after dawn. Their boards fastened to the roof of Brody's vintage Jeep Wagoneer. Crisp air, placid water, and promising waves were all present. The beach was crowded by mid-morning with surfers, families, and tourists. With his friends following closely behind, Connor was in his element as he paddled out past the breakers with ease. The sea seemed calm, but there was a sinister roil beneath the surface. Connor experienced the current's well-known pull as he paddled farther out. He could feel an icy undercurrent brushing against his legs in the unusually cold water. He took a moment to look over the horizon and was momentarily blinded by the glint of the sun off the surface. He dismissed it, regained his focus, and started to position himself to ride the subsequent wave. At that moment, he saw a shadow moving beneath him. Connor initially believed it to be a seal. These waters were frequented by seals, and he had previously witnessed many of them scuttling through the waves. However, this shadow was unique. It moved more slowly and deliberately, and it was bigger. Connor experienced a chill, a gut feeling alerting him to the fact that something was amiss. The water around him erupted before he could react. The great white shark's enormous jaws clamped down on Connor's right leg with terrifying speed and accuracy. He was dragged beneath in a whirlpool of red after the impact knocked him off his board. The scene unfolded before his friends, who were still about 20 yards away, and they froze in shock. Brody was the first to respond, screaming for assistance and racing toward Connor as he paddled. After a brief period of hesitation brought on by their fear, Ezra and Kellen started paddling in the direction of their friend. Several people on the beach became aware of the disturbance and started yelling, their voices joining the frantic cry of alarm. For a moment, Connor surfaced again, struggling to break free from the shark's hold while gasping for air. Presumably bewildered or alarmed by the opposition, the predator briefly let him go before turning around. While Connor struggled to stay afloat, blood leaked into the water, discoloring the waves. Nearby, a small motorboat, led by Alden Cray, a local fisherman, had already started to speed in the direction of the scene. A 60-year-old grizzled man who had lived his entire life on the water, Alden had seen enough to understand what was going on. He quickly reached Connor, and with Brody's assistance, who had been able to get to his friend just before the boat arrived, he dragged the teenager on board. Connor's injuries were disastrous. An artery in his leg had been severed by the shark's bite, and he had suffered significant blood loss. Although Alden and Brody did their best to apply pressure to the wound, it was evident that Connor's condition was grave. He had a pale face and shallow breathing. After being alerted by beachgoers, paramedics were already waiting when they arrived at the shore. However, it was too late. At the scene, Connor James was pronounced dead. The community was rocked as soon as word of the attack spread. Cape Cod had long been regarded as a haven of safety where families could enjoy the sea without worrying about danger. That illusion was shattered by Connor's passing. Authorities began searching the waters for the shark and immediately closed Newcomb Hollow Beach. According to marine biologists, there was a tragic case of mistaken identity where the shark thought Connor was a seal. They clarified that great whites were highly evolved predators, acting instinctively rather than as mindless killers. Connor's pals were inconsolable. His closest companion at the time of the attack, Brody, battled guilt and kept reliving the day's events in his head. The recollection of their friend's last moments plagued Ezra and Kellen as well. After being inseparable for a while, the three boys drifted apart in the months that followed, each coping with their loss in a unique way. The attack rekindled the controversy surrounding human activity in shark habitats. While some residents advocated for coexistence and education, conservationists argued for culling programs or other ways to lower the shark population. The town of Wellfleet put up warning signs at each of its beaches, advising surfers and swimmers to stay near the shore and avoid brightly colored clothing and shiny jewelry. Patrol boats and drones used for shark spotting became ubiquitous along the coast. The fear persisted despite these attempts. Many people now view the ocean as a reminder of the strength and unpredictability of nature, rather than a place of freedom and adventure. Connor James was a young man who lived life on his terms and was described by his friends as fearless and passionate. Friends and family came together to honor his memory and share stories at a memorial service hosted by his family at Newcomb Hollow Beach. In silent remembrance of a life too short, a wooden plaque with his name was erected on the dunes above the surf. Despite the tragedy, Connor's passing served as a warning to the community. People were compelled to acknowledge the dangers of going into the ocean and to acknowledge the force of nature. It was a warm, cloudless day in Cancun, Mexico, during the summer of 2004. The sun hung heavily in the sky, casting its golden light onto the turquoise waters of the Caribbean Sea. This stretch of coastline, known for its white sand beaches and vibrant coral reefs, has become one of the most popular tourist destinations in the world. Beneath the surface, the reefs were alive with marine life. Schools of glittering fish, sprawling coral gardens, and the occasional appearance of larger predators. For years, the locals spoke of the beauty of the sea and the dangers it could hold, though such warnings rarely deterred eager visitors. Emily Green, a 29-year-old tourist from Portland, Oregon, arrived in Cancun with excitement bubbling in her chest. She had spent months saving for this trip, planning every detail of her vacation. A lover of the ocean but not an experienced swimmer, Emily had been looking forward to snorkeling as one of the highlights of her trip. She had signed up for a guided snorkeling tour through a local company known for taking tourists to lesser-visited reefs. The group met early that morning at Puerto Juarez, a busy marina on the edge of town. The guide, a wiry man in his late 30s named Ramon Castillo, was a seasoned diver who had been leading tours for over a decade. He assured the group of 8 tourists that the location they were visiting, a secluded reef called Arrecife de Solitario, was safe and brimming with marine life. For Emily, the promise of solitude and vibrant underwater vistas was irresistible. She hadn't realized that the isolation of the reef would later prove to be its greatest danger. The boat ride to the reef took about an hour. As they moved farther from shore, the blue-green waters deepened to a darker hue. The tourists chatted amongst themselves, their voices mingling with the hum of the boat's engine. Emily struck up a conversation with another tourist, a soft-spoken man named Victor Lannister from Winnipeg, who had been traveling solo. Like Emily, Victor was new to snorkeling and appeared to be both excited and anxious about the activity. As promised, the reef was remote and unspoiled when they arrived, with colorful coral formations visible just below the surface. During a quick safety briefing, Ramon told everyone to stay together and refrain from touching the coral or the marine life. He mentioned that occasionally, non-aggressive nurse sharks were seen in the region. Maybe, to keep the group from becoming alarmed, he didn't bring up more dangerous species. One by one, the visitors put on their snorkeling equipment and entered the water. Emily was instantly mesmerized by the world beneath the waves, despite her awkward flippers. She floated above a kaleidoscope of fish and coral in the warm, transparent water. Her breathing was loud in the snorkel as she adapted to the swimming rhythm, and she followed the group for a while. But as her confidence grew, she began to lose herself, drawn by a particularly vibrant coral patch. Ramon observed, but he wasn't worried right away. Emily didn't appear to be in danger, and tourists frequently wandered a little. He directed the remaining members of the group while pointing out a nurse shark lying on the sandy bottom. The others gathered, admiring the placid creature and taking underwater pictures. But Emily had covered more ground than she thought. The reef sloped down into deeper water, and the sunlight dimmed slightly as she swam. She was captivated by the sights, a school of bright blue tangs darting around her, and the sway of sea fans in the current. She didn't notice the shadow moving just beyond her peripheral vision. The bull shark, a large female nearly 8 feet long, had likely been in the area for some time. Sharks are often drawn to reefs by the abundance of fish, and this one had been cruising the edge of the coral searching for prey. Emily may have drawn the shark's attention with her splashing and the sporadic glint of sunlight off her snorkel. Because of their aggressive tendencies and ability to thrive in shallow waters, bull sharks are frequently observed, albeit rarely, in the vicinity of tourist destinations. Then it happened. The attack was sudden and lightning fast. When the shark surfaced from below, it hit Emily so hard that it tore off her snorkel mask. Its strong jaws clamped down on her torso, digging into her flesh and bone. Emily thrashed instinctively, her legs kicking against the shark's rough hide as the pain was sudden and overwhelming. The group, still close to the boat, heard the faint, eerie sound even though the water muffled her screams. The first to respond was Ramon, who yelled for everyone to get back in the boat. He jumped into the water and swam as quickly as he could toward Emily. Reluctantly, Victor and another visitor, a woman named Sophia Clark, followed, staying near the guide. The water surrounding Emily was murky with blood when they arrived. The shark had released her and disappeared into the depths, likely mistaking her for a struggling fish and realizing its error too late. Emily was barely conscious when Ramon grabbed her and began towing her back to the boat. She suffered severe injuries, with deep cuts on her side and abdomen that exposed bone and muscle. With bloody hands, the tourists helped drag her onto the boat. The bleeding was too great, even though Victor, who was pale and shaking, applied pressure to the wounds with a towel. Emily's breathing slowed and her skin was pale. Although they were too far from the coast to receive help immediately, Ramon radioed for assistance. But Emily passed away from her wounds by the time they arrived at the marina. Her death was later ruled a result of massive blood loss and trauma. The attack quickly gained widespread attention, garnering media coverage both domestically and abroad. Experts hypothesized that the shark's actions were a result of mistaken identity, a sad but uncommon occurrence. Even though they were dangerous, bull sharks rarely attack people. The secluded location of the reef and Emily's separation from the group may have contributed to the event. Emily's closest companion in the aftermath, Victor Lannister, returned to Winnipeg with a renewed apprehension about the ocean. Although there was little he could have done to stop the attack, he later acknowledged that the experience left him with persistent guilt and nightmares. While still conducting tours, Ramon Castillo became more watchful to make sure nobody ever left the group. As for Emily Green, her family in Portland mourned the loss of a vibrant, adventurous young woman who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Her story became a somber reminder of the ocean's beauty and its dangers, a balance that many who had visited its depths often. It was July 12, 2013, a regular summer day in the Pacific Ocean near the island of Guam, a United States territory in Micronesia. The United States ship Charleston, a Navy vessel known for its role in security patrols, was anchored off the island. The crew had been conducting routine training exercises for the past few days. Onboard sailors performed their duties, maintaining equipment, running drills, and ensuring the ship was in top condition. Among them was Petty Officer Mark Reynolds, a 28-year-old Navy diver with 8 years of experience. Reynolds was known among his crew for being calm and professional, with a sharp focus on his job. That morning, like every other, he had breakfast with his fellow sailors in the ship's mess. The atmosphere was relaxed, with some joking around and others mentally preparing for the day's work. Reynolds, however, was thinking about the task ahead. The ship reported a minor hull breach during the previous day's training exercise. It wasn't a significant issue, but it required a diver's inspection. Reynolds had done this countless times before and saw it as routine. After the morning briefing, the ship's officers assigned Reynolds to inspect the hull. The waters near Guam were rich with marine life. Sharks were common in this region, including tiger sharks and the infamous great white. Great white sharks in particular were known for their size and strength. They were apex predators capable of growing up to 20 feet long and weighing over 4,000 pounds. Although they rarely attacked humans, their presence always demanded caution. The crew prepared the diving equipment. Reynolds checked his oxygen tank, fins, and tools. He moved with the confidence of someone who had done this many times before. The crew on deck helped him suit up, double-checking everything. A few of them chatted about the clear water conditions, which made dives easier. Still, some sailors couldn't shake the uneasy feeling about sharks. The Pacific was unpredictable, and the presence of a large predator could turn routine into disaster. Around mid-morning, Reynolds entered the water. The ocean was calm, and visibility was decent. The crew watched as he disappeared beneath the surface, his movements deliberate and practiced. His task was to assess the damage, measure the breach, and mark the spot for future repairs. For the first few minutes, everything went as planned. Reynolds moved along the hull, inspecting the area with his flashlight. He communicated through his radio, providing updates to the crew. On deck, sailors monitored his progress. Suddenly, one of them noticed a dark shadow moving beneath the water. It was large, much bigger than anything they had seen so far. The shadow moved slowly at first, circling the ship, then disappeared. The sailors exchanged nervous glances. They knew what it was, a shark, and judging by the size, it was massive. Reynolds, focused on his work, was unaware of the growing danger. The shark's behavior suggested it was curious, possibly drawn to the activity around the ship. Sharks in these waters often followed vessels, attracted by food waste and other debris. The United States ship Charleston wasn't an exception. Waste disposal practices, while controlled, still left traces in the water that could lure predators. As Reynolds finished inspecting the breach, the shadow reappeared. This time it moved closer, circling him. On deck, the crew shouted and waved frantically, trying to warn him. Reynolds turned but couldn't see the shark. The crew's signals became more frantic as the predator closed the gap. The great white shark struck without hesitation. With a burst of speed, it lunged at Reynolds, its jaws clamping down in a single, devastating bite. The force was unimaginable. In one swift motion, the shark decapitated him, leaving his bloodied torso floating in the water. The ocean turned red as the shark circled its kill, its movements slow and deliberate. On deck, the crew was frozen in horror. Some shouted and others scrambled to prepare the rescue boat, but they all knew it was too late. The predator remained near the body, guarding its territory. The sailors' attempts to approach were met with aggression. The shark moved closer to the ship, its behavior territorial. Reynolds' torso floated lifelessly, drifting with the current. Blood spread out in the water, drawing smaller fish to the scene. The predator circled, occasionally nudging the remains as if to assert dominance. The crew was helpless, unable to recover the body without risking another attack. The commanding officer on the United States ship Charleston quickly assessed the situation. Attempts to retrieve Reynolds' body were made using a rescue boat and a hook, but each time the shark became more aggressive, forcing them to retreat. Its sheer size and power made it impossible to challenge. The shark wasn't leaving, and its behavior indicated it wouldn't for hours. After several failed attempts, the officers decided to abandon the recovery effort. The crew was devastated. Sailors who had known Reynolds struggled to process what had happened. The dive, which had started as a routine task, had ended in tragedy. For hours, the shark remained near the ship. It was later identified as a 19-foot great white, an unusually large specimen for the region. Sharks of this size were rare but not unheard of. Their presence near ships often raised questions about human impact on marine environments. Food waste, noise, and movement could all attract predators, making incidents like this more likely. The crew aboard the Charleston was shaken. Many of them couldn't forget the sight of Reynolds' body or the predator circling below. His death was a stark reminder of the risks divers faced, even in controlled operations. Investigators later confirmed that the shark had likely been following the ship for some time. Waste disposal practices, though regulated, were thought to have contributed to the incident. Great white sharks are known for their keen sense of smell and ability to detect disturbances in the water from miles away. The ship's presence had likely drawn this particular shark and became territorial when Reynolds entered the water. For the Navy, the tragedy led to changes in diving protocols. Divers operating in predator-heavy waters were given stricter guidelines, including the use of shark deterrent equipment and improved monitoring. The goal was to prevent another incident like this from happening again. The crew of the United States ship Charleston would never forget what they witnessed that day. Reynolds' death was a painful loss for the Navy and a reminder of the ocean's power. Even experienced sailors couldn't predict everything in those deep, unpredictable waters. On a calm evening in late summer, September 14, 2010, Sarah Jacobs set out for a paddle along the coast of Santa Cruz, California. Santa Cruz is a vibrant coastal city known for its beaches and marine life. The waters off its shore are part of the Monterey Bay, a deep underwater canyon that attracts all kinds of sea creatures, from dolphins to seals. But the bay is also home to great white sharks, apex predators that have been a source of both fear and fascination for locals and tourists. Sarah, 31, was an experienced kayaker who often spent her evenings on the water. She had grown up in the area and felt at home on the ocean. That evening, she decided to take her bright yellow kayak out to enjoy the sunset. The day had been warm, and as the sun dipped lower, it cast golden light over the water. She packed a small dry bag with water, her phone, and a flashlight, just in case she stayed out longer than planned. The beach was quiet as she launched her kayak. A few surfers paddled in the distance, and a small fishing boat bobbed farther out. Sarah adjusted her paddle and began her journey. Her strokes were steady as she moved away from the shore, the water calm beneath her. She had kayaked this stretch of the coast dozens of times and knew the area well, including the small, rocky outcroppings and kelp forests that dotted the bay. The Monterey Bay is one of the most studied marine ecosystems in the world. Its waters are teeming with life, including sea otters, seals, and schools of fish. These animals, in turn, attract predators like great white sharks. The sharks in this region can grow over 15 feet long and weigh more than 2,000 pounds. They are powerful hunters, known for their ability to breach the surface to catch seals. While attacks on humans are rare, they are not unheard of, especially during the late summer and early fall when shark activity peaks. Sarah was aware of the risks, but had always believed she could avoid them. She stayed alert, watching the water for signs of movement. She paddled past the kelp beds where seals often lounged, their playful splashes sometimes mistaken for predators. The fishing boat she'd noticed earlier was now a speck on the horizon. The sun sank lower, and the water began to reflect the deepening orange of the sky. As Sarah ventured farther from shore, the water grew darker. She paused for a moment, taking in the stillness around her. Then, without warning, the surface exploded. A great white shark breached, its massive body erupting from below and slamming into the side of her kayak. The impact was so powerful that it shattered the lightweight plastic, tossing Sarah into the water. Disoriented, Sarah struggled to stay afloat. Her paddle floated nearby, but her kayak was destroyed, its jagged remains scattered around her. She kicked hard, trying to keep her head above water, and turned to look for the shark. The water was murky now, stirred up by the attack, and her heart pounded as she scanned the surface. A nearby fishing boat had seen the commotion. The crew shouted and pointed, trying to get her attention, but they were too far to reach her quickly. Sarah, realizing the danger she was in, began swimming toward a rocky outcrop about 50 yards away. Her movements were frantic, every stroke a fight against the panic rising inside her. The great white shark didn't retreat. It circled below her, its instincts triggered by the thrashing in the water. Moments later, it struck again, its jaws clamping down on Sarah's leg. The force was overwhelming, pulling her under briefly before the shark released her. She surfaced, gasping for air, her leg bleeding heavily. The pain was unbearable, but her survival instincts kicked in. She tried to push herself toward the rocks, even as her strength began to fade. The fishing boat sped toward her, the crew throwing out a lifeline. One man jumped into the water, risking his safety to reach her. Sarah reached out, her fingers just brushing the rope, but the shark wasn't finished. It came at her again, this time dragging her down. The water churned as the predator thrashed, its movements violent and unrelenting. The boat crew fought to pull Sarah from the water. They used poles and ropes, shouting instructions to each other. The man in the water managed to grab her arm and hold on despite the shark's proximity. With a final heave, they hauled her onto the deck. Her body was limp, her injuries severe. Blood pooled around her as the crew worked frantically to stop the bleeding. They radioed for help, their voices urgent, and began the race back to shore. The shark lingered near the wreckage of Sarah's kayak, its fins slicing through the water. It swam in slow circles before disappearing into the depths. By the time the boat reached the harbor, emergency responders were waiting. Sarah was rushed to a nearby hospital, but her injuries were too severe. The shark had inflicted deep wounds, and she had lost too much blood. Despite the efforts of the crew and medical team, she did not survive. The news of the attack spread quickly, shocking the local community. Santa Cruz was no stranger to shark sightings, but fatal attacks were rare. Experts later analyzed the incident, speculating that the bright yellow kayak or Sarah's movements in the water might have triggered the shark's predatory instincts. The timing of the attack during peak shark season was another factor. Sarah Jacobs's death served as a grim reminder of the ocean's dangers. Her love for the water had drawn her out that evening, but the same waters that brought her peace had also claimed her life. The people of Santa Cruz mourned her loss, their thoughts turning to the delicate balance between humans and the wild creatures that share this. Are supposed to be a time of joy, love, and celebration. On May 27, 2001, Ben and Emily Cooper, a young couple from Portland, Oregon, had planned a beautiful day surrounded by their closest family and friends. Their dream was to celebrate their union in Hawaii, a place Emily had always loved. Maui, with its serene waters and breathtaking coastline, seemed perfect. They decided to charter a private boat to mark the special occasion, hoping for a day full of laughter and unforgettable memories. The morning began with excitement. The couple and their guests gathered on a dock in Lahaina, a historic town known for its whaling past and lively harbor. The boat they'd rented, the Coral Star, was large enough to comfortably fit the 30 guests, with a spacious deck and shaded areas for those who wanted to relax. As they boarded, Emily, in her simple white dress, radiated happiness. Ben, dressed in a crisp linen shirt and slacks, couldn't stop smiling. The group set out into the clear, calm waters of the Pacific Ocean, unaware of the danger lurking below. Hawaii's waters are home to an incredible array of marine life. The islands are surrounded by vibrant coral reefs and schools of colorful fish, but among these wonders are predators like tiger sharks. These sharks are apex hunters, growing up to 14 feet long. Unlike other species, tiger sharks are known for their boldness. They'll investigate almost anything in the water, from floating debris to humans. Attacks are rare, but when they happen, they're often fatal because of the shark's size and power. By mid-afternoon, the celebration was in full swing. The boat had anchored near a small, picturesque cove not far from Honolulu Bay. The guests toasted the newlyweds, enjoying drinks and fresh seafood. Music played softly in the background. Some guests sat along the edges of the deck, their feet dangling close to the water. The captain and crew kept an eye on everyone, making sure they were safe. The mood was light and joyful. A few people decided to take a swim, diving off the back of the boat into the warm water. Emily hesitated at first, not wanting to ruin her dress, but her friends convinced her to come closer to the edge for a group photo. As the group gathered near the rail, laughing and jostling for space, no one noticed the faint ripple in the water just a few yards away. The attack happened without warning. A 12-foot tiger shark, likely drawn by the movement and noise, breached the surface with terrifying speed. It lunged toward Emily, its powerful body colliding with the side of the boat. The impact knocked her off balance, and she tumbled into the water. Guests screamed and scrambled back as the shark struck again, clamping its jaws around Emily's leg. Blood spread quickly in the water, creating a crimson cloud. Emily struggled, kicking and thrashing, but the shark's grip was unrelenting. Ben, still in his wedding attire, didn't hesitate. He jumped into the water, his only thought to save his wife. The shark turned its attention to Ben as he approached Emily. It released her leg and charged at him, its massive body cutting through the water with terrifying ease. Ben tried to grab Emily, who was barely conscious, but the shark struck him, its teeth tearing into his arm and side. Despite the pain, he kept fighting, trying to shield Emily from further attacks. The guests on the boat were frantic. Some threw life rings and ropes into the water, shouting for Ben and Emily to grab hold. Others waved and signaled to a nearby tour boat for help. The crew of the Coral Star quickly radioed for emergency assistance, but they knew it would take time for help to arrive. The shark circled back, its movements slow and deliberate, as if deciding which of the two to attack next. Ben, bleeding heavily, clung to Emily, using his body to keep her afloat. The guests watched helplessly, their faces pale with fear. One of the crew members grabbed a long pole and tried to prod the shark away, but the predator barely reacted. After what felt like an eternity, a nearby boat arrived at the scene. The crew from the second vessel jumped into action, pulling Ben and Emily from the water. The shark swam off, disappearing into the depths as quickly as it had appeared. Emily was unresponsive by the time they got her on board. Her injuries were severe, with deep wounds to her legs and torso. Despite the efforts of those around her, she didn't survive. Ben, though conscious, was in critical condition. He lay on the deck, shivering and pale, his arm and side torn open. When the Coast Guard arrived minutes later, they airlifted Ben to a hospital in Maui. The guests, still in shock, remained on the boat, comforting each other and trying to process the horrifying event they had just witnessed. Experts later examined the attack and concluded that the tiger shark had likely been in the area for some time. The noise and activity from the boat, combined with people swimming, might have attracted the predator. Tiger sharks are opportunistic hunters, and their curiosity often leads them to investigate unfamiliar movements or sounds. The Coopers' wedding day, meant to be a celebration of love and togetherness, turned into a nightmare that no one would forget. Emily's life was tragically cut short, and Ben's injuries would leave physical and emotional scars that he carried for the rest of his life. For the guests who were there, the memory of that day became a haunting reminder of the ocean's unpredictable dangers.